So this past weekend, my girlfriend planned this anniversary trip. Each part of the trip had been its own surprise, so I was completely in the dark with what we were doing next. We had spent the day sightseeing in Virginia, grabbing lunch and dinner in different places, visiting a winery, and some other things. I didn't know where we were going to spend the night, so I assumed that we would be going to a little hotel, or maybe some Airbnb or something. Her plan instead was to go night camping at one of her favorite spots in the Shenandoah Mountains. I ended up ruining the surprise for myself when we were at a gas station. I ended up fishing through my trunk for a can of soda, and I found all of the camping gear. About an hour later, we were slowly driving up the road to the Storybook Trail. She knew it was going to be a cold night, but we were not ready for it to be snowing. The spot that she picked out was actually a couple of miles past the trail, but the road had been blocked off just past the trail marker. My girlfriend was super disappointed and upset that we couldn't go to her spot, and we decided instead to spend the night camping near the trail. Her plan was to leave me in the car alone for about 20 minutes while she went to set up. She had envisioned me turning the corner to this little setup, with our tents and sleeping bags ready to go, a fire going, and a bed sheet tied to some trees, with my favorite movie playing from her portable projector. Since the road was blocked off, she not only needed time to set up, but also to find a spot where she could fit a tent. She was determined not to let the roadblock ruin her plans, so she had me park the car next to the trail, gather up everything that she needed, and told me to wait in the car while she went to go set up. My girlfriend has camped and hiked all over the US, by herself as well, so I trusted that she would be alright setting everything up. Plus, it's not like she was heading out into the thick wilderness. The trail itself is just 1/4 of a mile stretch of sidewalk that goes through the forest and ends with a circular metal platform with some railing overlooking the valley below. So I'm in the car watching my girlfriend's headlamp slowly disappear through the trees and snow. She told me to sit tight and wait for her to set up, and if she was not back within the hour, something was wrong. It was dead quiet outside, and even inside the car, I was starting to get a bit creeped out. I couldn't shake this feeling that somebody was watching me, or that something was going to jump out at me, up against the window. In an act of endless courage and bravery, I reclined my seat as far as it could go, white-knuckled my pocket knife, and I kept my head on a swivel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw her headlamp slowly bobbing back my way. She opened the door, explained that she found a great spot. After putting on a few more layers and grabbing a few bags to bring to the spot, we started walking down the trail. The trek to the spot was unremarkable, but surreal. The moon was super bright, so visibility was high, and the snow covering everything was beautiful. I still felt a bit off, and a little spooked from my 30 minutes in the car, but the feeling of being watched was gone. As we were walking, she was pointing out different spots she had tried, and how she was excited to show me the spot that she ended up choosing. It only took about 7 minutes to get there, and before we turned the corner, she told me to wait and hang out for a few minutes while she put the movie on. I could still kind of see her 20 yards up the path, messing with the projector through the trees, but even so, the feeling of being watched came back. She finished messing with the projector and came to grab me. She had found a flat patch off to the right of the platform overlook. She set up the tent, made sure to set up the projector facing a sheet that she had tied to some trees, and she put some small electric candles around the floor. After getting situated and warming up a bit in our sleeping bags, we started the movie. I'll try to cut to the chase because I feel like this has been a lot of setup for nothing spooky yet. Halfway through the movie, we both decided to just go to sleep because we were both exhausted and freezing. We ended up closing the tent. We try to snuggle in together, and we do our best to get warm. She had not anticipated the fact that it was 10 degrees colder than the forecast had predicted, and we had decided against building a fire since we were so close to the trail. The movie had distracted me from that feeling of somebody watching, but now it had returned. I felt unwelcome, uneasy, and exposed. It didn't help that I was finding it hard to go to sleep because of the freezing temperature and uncomfortable floor. I was a bit disappointed that we were not in a warm hotel bed, but I was touched by all the effort my girlfriend had put into this, and I was determined not to hurt her feelings. Eventually, I fell asleep. My dreams were crazy weird, and they felt very real, and from what I can remember, I was dreaming of feeling so frustrated and cold that I went back to the car by myself, and soon I was able to relax with the heat blasting. I woke up in the middle of the night in some uncomfortable position. My neck cracked at an odd angle. I was feeling relieved that we were back in the car, until I realized that I was still in the tent. It was a strange feeling. I no longer felt like somebody was watching me or uneasy, but like my mind had been filled with anger at this whole situation. I tossed and turned for nearly an hour, but I couldn't go back to sleep. I felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't get warm again. I finally asked my girlfriend if we could go back to the car, and her response actually surprised me.
That's a stupid idea. Why don't you just deal with it and go back to sleep?
We began to bicker and argue. At that time, I thought it was because I was exhausted and freezing, but looking back, the whole situation felt off. From her point of view, well, looking back now, she had nightmares all night. She told me that
I dream of a man stalking us to our tent and shooting us in the back of our heads. Another one of me committing suicide by throwing myself over the edge of the outlook as I screamed, and a few other nightmares that I can't remember too much.
when I asked her about us going back to the car, she responded super annoyed.
Why can't you just stick this out? You always gotta ruin everything.
I asked why she was acting like this, and of course the bickering continued, the whole argument of, this is your fault. Then she said,
I wasn't asleep when I heard what you said. You don't think I heard you mumble when you said I should just leave this fucking tent and go back to the car?
She said that when she heard me say that. We had been arguing for a bit, and I had turned to the side to try to go back to sleep. 5 minutes had gone past, with neither of us saying anything, until she suddenly asked.
What did you say?
She then swears that she heard my voice to try to instigate something. After this, we just continue arguing. Looking back, can't even understand how different we felt compared to our moods the day and evening prior. In retrospect, it not only felt like somebody or something was changing our mood and how we felt about each other, but my desire to go back to the car and her desire to kick me back to the car almost felt like something was trying to separate us. Lucky for us, that didn't happen. The bickering ended up causing us to quickly pack everything right there in the middle of the night and go back to the car. Still, our moods were getting worse. We didn't speak to each other the whole walk back, and we both remember feeling like we hated one another. Of course, we had fights here and there, but nothing even comes close to how we felt about each other that night. It was like if out of nowhere, we suddenly decided we never wanted to see each other again. When we got to the car, none of us said anything. I climbed into the trunk, put my sleeping bag over my head, and I thought about being anywhere but there. She went into the driver's seat and turned the car on so we could sleep with the heater on. About 10 minutes later, she realized that we were low on gas and decided to go down into town to fill up. But still, we didn't talk to each other. It was almost like the negative emotions I was feeling were keeping me from sleeping. So I lay there in silence as we drove down into town. Apparently, during the drive down the road, she felt the steering wheel violently jerk to the side, swerving the car towards the edge of the road and the cliff below. This happened a few more times, and I remember thinking she was most likely trying to swerve to avoid potholes or something. The weirdness doesn't really stop there though. The first few gas stations that she tried going to wouldn't accept her card, or flat out didn't work. She finally found a station that worked, and after filling up, decided for whatever reason, we would go back to park the car by the trail. The whole time I remember hearing the radio playing softly from when she had first started the car, all the way until we were back from the gas stations and parked at the trail. But from her point of view, she remembers the car being completely silent. Nothing was playing at all until the radio spontaneously turned on when she got back on the road up to the trail. Besides feeling super creeped out while waiting in the car the whole time, the primary emotion we both felt was anger. To be sure, the entire situation itself was creepy, but we only realized how bizarre the situation was the next day. After we parked the car and let the heater run, we both ended up falling asleep for a few more hours, and we woke up around 8:30 in the morning. We were both still angry and barely spoke to each other, besides deciding that we would still go to breakfast as planned. Now here's the part that gets us. The further away we drove from that trail in the mountain, and as the morning went on, it slowly felt like this weird fog had been lifted from our heads. Slowly, our feeling of anger and hatred started to fade, and it was like we were back to normal. We were both unable to explain why we were so angry at each other the night before. As we sat in the diner and talked through what happened, we came to realize that we both had felt something had influenced us to feel that way. At this time, I talked about how much I just wanted to go back to the car and how the feeling overwhelmed me. She told me about her awful nightmares and the anger that she felt against me, and how she had this overwhelming feeling to kick me out of the tent, back to the car. It was almost like something was trying to separate us. She told me that when she left me in the car to set up, she didn't feel scared at all. She went on to tell me about the radio and how it suddenly turned on as I talked about how it was on the whole time. She also mentioned the moment that I had said something to her to instigate a fight, and I kept telling her that I hadn't said anything. She went white as a sheet.
Have you heard of the legends of Appalachia? That's what it reminds me. They say up there you can sometimes hear the voice of loved ones call you, and sometimes it's other things, acting like your loved ones.
My girlfriend was convinced some spirit or something didn't want us to camp there that night, and she wanted to do some digging into the history of the trail to see if anything weird has ever happened there. Big surprise. It didn't take long. Daniel Lee, Cirque. Back in 1999, he stabbed his 14-year-old daughter in his ex-wife's home. Afterwards, he kidnapped his 4-year-old daughter, took her up here, and murdered her on the very platform that we had slept not 6 feet away from. After killing her, he threw her over the edge of the overlook. He tried taking his own life in the same spot, but was unsuccessful, and he was actually put to death a few years later. I know it was a pretty long story that didn't really show anything crazy, but to be honest, this was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I can't help but feel that somehow that tragic case was somehow involved in all this. I know it sounds like a shitty creepypasta, but I promise you, this actually happened to us. When we got back home, there were no lingering effects that I can think of. The only striking thing was that we were in such a better mood the next day, and we were both convinced something paranormal was involved. I was worried that maybe we brought some bad energy or whatever back home. I was also expecting to have some nightmares or even experience more creepy shit, but nothing else happened. Our kitchen light bulb did go out, but that was pretty much it. Also, my girlfriend did read this, and she roasted me for how I wrote it. She wanted to clarify that the dream that she had wasn't that she was killing herself by throwing herself over the overlook, but that she had different nightmares where she was just falling after being thrown over the overlook. She just wants to say that the whole time, it just felt like there was this awful, heavy negative energy that she had never felt before while camping.
Clearly, we did not choose a great place to set up camp.
Also, Also, I don't know if it's clear, but the location where we camped at was right off the Storybook Trail near Luray, Virginia. Everything was creepy. Most likely we'll never go there again, and maybe you shouldn't go there if you were planning to. I used to be obsessed with those Goatman Skinwalker stories online, any kind of scary stories for a long time, but I hadn't looked into it for a while by this point. And then, on December 28th, the following happened, and I had trouble sleeping for a long time. First of all because of what happened, but also because of where I was living at. I was 21. I was a senior in college from Connecticut, and I lived in a small area about 20 minutes to the closest supermarket or fast food place. I was going to school in Washington, D.C., not the nicest part, the part where crackheads are a real thing, and the police are actually reassuring rather than troublesome. I definitely seen some stuff in my day. I do want to mention here that I'm not some skinny individual, but at this time I was about 6'1" and 240. And it wasn't all muscle, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I could have dropped about 15 to 20 pounds. I mean, what can I say? I love smoking and getting drunk, but being the good student that I am, I ended up picking accounting, and I was being an intern for a mid-sized firm and getting paid about $20 an hour. However, college was expensive, so I was delivering pizzas at night after everything was closed. It's a very cheap, drunk food kind of pizza place that has a huge delivery radius, and it was about 20 minutes from my house, 5 minutes from the beach. My place is north of there, and we deliver about another 20 minutes past my house. So basically, the further north that you go from the pizza place, the more lonely it gets. I work until close, and this happened around 9:45 p.m. So at this time, I was in the back folding pizza boxes like a good little employee. The girl on the counter comes back with a delivery slip. She tells me that the customer sounded weird on the phone, kind of like he was talking through a fan or on his hands or something, and he sounded like he was gurgling. My experience here made me think that it was a crackhead, even though around here it's way more likely to be some freak or some sort of drug addict. I assumed that some weird interaction was going to happen. Didn't surprise me. I had plenty of those happen to me. I look at the address. I see that it's in the middle of nowhere. I am a little mad. I don't want to drive that far, but I am the guy who delivers pizzas. It happens to be the weirdest ticket that I ever seen. The guy ordered a large pizza with anchovies, ground beef, ham, sausage, pepperoni, about $20 worth of extras. Then go ask the counter girl if it's right. She then says that she thinks so, but she couldn't really make it out, so she just did her best. She's about 16, so I do cut her some slack. I just assumed that she was kind of distracted, daydreaming, on her phone, social media, or something. I call the number back. The phone just rings 5, 10, 20, 30 times. There's no answer. I hang up and I call again. The phone goes to that whole message. The number you have dialed does not have a voicemail box set up yet. Blah blah blah. The manager decides to just make the pizza as requested, and then I just proceed from there. So the first pizza that I deliver was to a family that was totally blackout drunk. The couple actually invited me in for drinks, but I don't drink or smoke when I work, so I had to turn it down. When I got back from the round of deliveries, I was hoping that maybe the manager would have went and delivered the weird one. But surprise, no one did. So I end up taking the pizza and get into my car. I enter the address into my phone. It's on a side street to a park that locals call open space, which despite the name, is about 500 acres of straight woods, and it happens to be about 25 minutes away. I put on some music, and I take off. you're not from this area, it can be hard to explain. Winter in the woods is scary out there. There's never a single sound. Ever. Unless there's something larger than a cat walking around. But if not, it happens to be just you and the dead silence. I finally get to this address. There are a few houses on the street, but they sit about maybe 5 acres in, so they are basically spaced out. I was looking for 1134. I continue driving down, and I end up getting to 1134. I honestly just wanted to get this over with and get with the next delivery without getting stabbed by some pillhead over a pizza. I call a number, and it just continues ringing, but then it stops. Somebody had answered, but all I hear is some sort of buzzing or a weird humming noise. It is connected to my car stereo, and it's getting loud until I just hang up. They want to ruin my sound system. I'm overcome by the smell of trash. It was almost like driving through New Jersey. At the end of the driveway, there happens to be a light. Fuck it, I'm gonna pull into this house and knock, and ask if maybe they give the wrong number over the phone. This makes sense for a pillhead. When I see someone step out of the darkness into the light at the bottom of the driveway, this must be the weird guy wanting his pizza. I was expecting this guy to be all over the place, leaning over, and just really fucked up, but he's not. I stopped the car about 10 feet from him. He's wearing a black coat that looks 3 times too big for him. I don't look at him first. I was getting the pizza out of my car, and then I'm like, hey, sorry about the wait. This place is pretty far. There's no response. Looking back, I realize now that I should have seen the signs. The smell is still pretty pungent, but I know it's not trash day. I put the pizza on the roof of my car. He's standing under the light, on the opposite side of my car at this point. I finally paid enough attention to get a good look at him. He is kind of tall. His jeans are ripped up, and there's stains everywhere. And like I said, this big jacket. I look at his face. He has sunken eyes. I can't even see them with the light. And so far this whole time, the guy hasn't said anything. He is just standing still. I'm getting a little freaked out, so I stop the process and just stare back at this guy. He's staring right at me with those freaky eyes. And after looking at him, I realize that he's not standing still. He's kind of just bobbing side to side, but not with any fluid sense at all. His head kind of behaved like a car door. You know how it stops halfway open, and you give it another shove, and then it stops all the way open. Well, I saw his head do this, in no real pattern, for about 10 seconds. At this point, I'm really getting freaked out. Between the stench, the head, the thing with the eyes, and not answering any of my questions, and he's not even saying anything. He's just staring at me, doing those fucking creepy movements across from me. I stand frozen. So does he. He doesn't break eye contact. I take the phone out of my pocket and hold it level with the roof of the car. That way I can look at the guy and my phone at the same time. I go through the recent calls. I call a number for the guy. It starts going through, but I can't hear a phone anywhere. And then, out of the quiet of the woods, I hear what sounds like a cell phone ringing back there. At this point, I'm kicking myself for not getting my concealed permit yet. The guy is still standing there, still doing the head thing, but I swear, his face starts to curl into a smile. I finally get to speak. Can you come get this? Also, I think maybe you dropped your phone when you were hiding a body, or whatever the fuck you were doing in those woods. Trying to crack a joke at this point. I nervously laugh, still thinking that maybe this guy dug too deep into the prescription bottle, or found some PCP, or something. Then, I see his mouth open, his head still bobbing, not moving at all. He then makes some sort of low, guttural, quick grunt, and then a high grunt, and then a low one, and then a low one again. They are soft, almost like somebody clearing their throat. At this point, I'm just ready to book it out of there if I have to. Just as I'm about to say something, he interrupts me. I hear the words, but it sounds like he whispered, "Phone, not mine." The moment of silence between the words was way too long. My mind is racing at this point, and my knees are feeling weak. I'm literally just about to peace out, then push the pizza to the far side of the roof away from me. Finally, I say, "Sir, you're freaking me the fuck out. I have a 45 and less than 20 on me. Take this so I can get the fuck out of here." At this point, I did say those words. I think I was pissed off and scared. But when I say this, his head bobbing movement stops. His eyes are burning a hole through my skull at this point. He then opens his mouth again. It was his. What the fuck? The guy then gets closer to the passenger door, but not like a normal step. More like a huge muscle spasm that propels him forward. Phone was his. His phone. 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 He just repeats that. At this point, I'm almost crying. I'm still standing next to the driver's side, and the pizza is still on the roof over the passenger rear door. The guy then jumps to the passenger door. He looks at me and says again, "Phone. Phone. Not his." I then tell him that I'm gonna call the fucking cops. "Just take the pizza and leave, sir." I see him smile, creepy smile, without moving his mouth. In one big jerky motion, the guy reaches forward, takes the pizza off the top of the car, and places a few round things that I later identify as quarters on the roof, surrounded by dark liquid that spreads all over the roof of my car. As soon as he does that, I don't even think about it. I just get in the car and peel down the road. I even left the hot sleeve for the pizza on the roof. I don't even close the door all the way. I then go down the road about 80. I pull a U-turn because I don't want to get lost out here with this psycho. I whip down the road and pass the place where he was. He's not there no more. I then get to the end of the road. There's a stop sign to merge with the main road. I then look to the right to make sure it's clear. I then look to the left. This guy's face is right up against my driver's side window. I basically peed on myself. I take off down the road. I finally make it back to the pizza place. I'm shaking like bloody hell. I end up smoking a joint to calm down, which I never do when I'm working. I walk in the front door of the pizza place, and then greeted with "Hey, the guy just called back. He said you forgot some food, but he said that he only ordered the pizza, and he said for you to come back." I look at my phone, which had been thrown around the car as I was driving. I had 14 missed calls from that number. I was in tears. All the voicemails are empty, except the last one. All I can hear is Rag breathing and these low grunts. I sit for about 10 minutes to try to calm down, and then remember the change on top of the roof. I go up to the car and turn on my flashlight. The roof of my car was covered in this weird liquid that smells like blood. I start throwing up. In the panel gap between my trunk and the end of my rear window, I end up finding some change. They're covered in the same maple syrup thick liquid. I go to open my car door. There's a single line of blood going from the front quarter panel to the driver's side door. This person, thing, whoever or whatever it was trying to open my door when it was next to me at the stop sign. I go back in. I tell the girl on the counter to try and call the number again. She tries over and over, but the phone just goes right to voicemail. The next morning I give the number to my uncle, who was the police captain a few towns over. He says the number is from a burner phone that was paid in cash. Basically it's untraceable, and it also appeared to be off by now. For a long time after that, I had to sleep with the lights on, and I just didn't get much sleep at all. I did end up finishing school. I ended up leaving that job, and I did end up leaving that whole area. One day, me and my two friends were scouting out some woods for a good hiding spot. One of these friends was, and still is, a weed grower just for his own use, and the forest around the other friend's house was quite spacious and desolated. So we hiked around for a few hours before it started getting dark. We were hiking up a rather large hill. We stopped for a break near the top since we had been walking around for a few hours now, taking note of potential spots, and it doesn't take long for all three of us to notice something is off. It's getting darker, but the sun won't hit the horizon from our view for at least another 20 to 30 minutes. The valleys in between the hills are pretty shady at this point, so the thing that we all notice, of course, the cliche silence. The forest of East Tennessee is never quiet, unless some sort of big animal is around. Large cats and feral dog packs are an occasional thing. One friend pulls out his handgun, and the other friend and I take out our knives. We then decide to start heading back because being stalked through the woods at night is the opposite of a good idea. So we start walking back down the hill that we came, and then we start to hear the distant sound of footsteps behind us. Standing behind this big tree, as if in a half-assed attempt to hide, was something that I haven't found any kind of official name for it, but the description of this thing and some other story about airsoft players at a military base seems to fit kind of close. Think of it as a shadow person, except it was a good 8 feet tall, big shoulders, with some long arms. It was like the build of a cross between a gorilla with some long but still bulky arms. It was about a good 30 or 40 feet from us. We could see the outline, but this thing itself was just a black shadow. It was completely still. We looked at it, trying to figure out what the hell we were looking at, and after several minutes of it being so still, we were beginning to think it was a naturally occurring optical illusion. So the friend with the gun stayed where he was, while the other friend and I fanned out to the sides to see what we would see from different angles. We stayed about the same distance, sort of trying to circle around it. It didn't take long to realize that we were not seeing a trick of the eyes, but that something was actually there. It stayed there the whole time, and its shape only changed the way you would expect of a three-dimensional object being viewed from a different angle. It was almost flanked out on 3 sides now, and it still didn't move. With a gun ready to shoot, we got a little brave, and our curiosity got the better of us. So we decided to see what would happen if one of us got close to it. We talked about it and decided that I would be the one to do so, since I was the fastest runner. So very slowly, I started getting close to it. I stopped for a moment at about 20 feet, and it continued to be still as a statue. I started again, and once I got to about 15 feet away, which was a major ass clincher, because this thing was fucking huge, it still didn't move. Actually, it began to fade away, just like a shadow disappearing as you slowly turn on the light with a dimmer switch. At this point, I'm confused as hell. It's like it was never there. I looked down to my friend with the gun and confirmed that they also saw it fade out. So I'm looking down the hill at my friends, who are just as confused as me at this point. But then I look past them a bit further down the hill, and off to the side, the same thing is there, facing their direction, from about 50 feet away. Before I can even point it out to them, they suddenly turn the opposite direction from it, looking to a spot down the hill and to my left. I glance over, and there's a second one, about 30 feet from me, looking right at me. I then turn and try to keep it in my eyesight, to face my friends better and clue them in on the one behind them, since all 3 of us are now aware of this one, only to see that it has now moved further up the hill, even with my friends, but still at roughly the same distance. Oh fuck, we're the ones being flanked now, I said as I pointed towards it. Actually, we're surrounded. Third one, 10 yards behind you. I don't even have to look behind me. I don't need to. I slide down the side of the hill and rejoin them faster than you can say Skinwalker. We then face different directions, and we try to figure out our next move. Surrounded on 3 sides, but at least the open side is downhill, in the way that we came as well. The middle one is up the hill, and it's a good distance away. Then, in the same direction as the middle one, but much closer, a 4th one starts to fade in. We all 3 speak at the same time. Gun bro is like, oh fuck. Knife bro is like, damn it. And myself, I'm like, well, we're fucked. This memory is now one that brings us all to chuckle after all this. So we keep our heads together and try to figure shit out. If it's hard for you to believe, it's because A, we're all already familiar with the animals that can, and we'll try to kill you in these woods, all the way up to and including bears. And B, even though this is one of the more interesting stories I have, it's not the first time that we encounter weird shit. Other experiences were quite a bit scarier, but those are short. So anyways, we end up establishing a few things about these weird shadow things. My best idea what to call them from the encounter so far. First, they will move when not looking at them. Second, they will not approach to a certain distance before disappearing. They actually seem to not want to get close to us. Despite them being whatever the fuck they are, they don't seem to be acting hostile towards us, though for sure they are reacting to our presence. So we all agree that whatever they are, we're actually in their land, and I guess maybe they are trying to herd us away from it, so outnumber and likely overpower. Did I mention how big they were? The top of my head would be about mid-rib level to them, and I'm 6 feet even. So we decided best to just get the fuck out of there. Gumbro suggested that they might be trying to herd us into a trap though, so we decided to try to go back the way that we came, with our backs to each other. Our navigation wasn't as good as it could be, because by the time that we made it down the hill, and another 50 feet, another 3 had appeared in places when no one was looking. It took only a split second. Not sure why they did this, seeing as how one of them had no issue appearing out of nowhere, right in front of me already. But who knows what the fuck is going on at this point. It took us about an hour before they stopped following us, 7 of them keeping in a loose semicircle around us, but never coming within 30 or 40 feet from us. After they stopped following, it took another 45 or so minutes to get back to Gumbro's house, because we were slowed down trying to keep back to back, close together, and moving the same way. I'm not sure what they were, but if feeling ever does mean anything, they didn't feel like they were evil, but more like the feeling you get when being close to a wild animal that has little ones to defend, giving you that look before you get too close. I always try to have more of a scientific mindset, and even though I believe in the paranormal, I also believe that the paranormal, or supernatural, is actually normal and natural. Hopefully that makes sense. That's my story. Believe it if you want. If anyone has any ideas what the fuck those things were, let me know. If I didn't say before, this happened in East Tennessee, and only a few hours drive from Smoky Mountains National Park. The following is an email that I received in response to this story. I can't believe somebody actually emailed me. They told me the following: the fact that you describe these things as gorillas and being able to disappear and appear is interesting. I'm actually inclined to believe you to some extent, because my uncle has never walked on his own after dark, since one time he walked home near a river, and this huge ape-like creature stood just in front of him. Didn't do anything but stand there. and then he described it as a kind of floating away from him across the river slowly, and then he blinked, and it was already on the other side. It had moved about a good 25 meters. I would like to just say what I think those things were. I like to believe that those were spirits connected to the land. Maybe Native Americans, or people that died in or near the forest. I do highly recommend doing some research on the place to see if anybody has died. Well, at least around that area. I also recommend going back one day, maybe without guns and weapons, in order to make contact with whatever those things were. Maybe there are some earth spirits. Most likely natives used to live around there. Cherokee mostly. That's what this person told me. I did end up doing some research, and there's been a few deaths. Not many, but some people do disappear in these woods often. I would like to go back to the area again, but my friend who lived nearby has since moved, and someone else now owns the property. I sure as hell wouldn't be going back unarmed though. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Even without unexplained spooks, these woods are dangerous, and going into them without a weapon, you're just asking to never be heard from or seen again. There's other areas of the woods that I have gone to, but I have yet to come across these shadow people, so I assume they stay localized to the patches of forest. You likely already know this, but there is a creature called the rake, but this wasn't that. I responded to the person who sent me the email. I told him thanks and a few of the things that I just told you, and he responded again. He said 2 things about going in armed. When you say you're pretty much asking never to be heard from again, I would actually reverse that. If I was a Native American spirit and someone came to my home with weapons, I would be pretty much pissed off. However, if you came to the land peacefully, chances are that I wouldn't try to ward you away unless you were looking for trouble. Skinwalkers. But I hate that they call those that, since I know skinwalkers refer to native medicine men that can turn into animals if they wear their fur. I have never had, and I have never heard from anyone in person about those things being able to look like people. I can, however, confirm that they can mimic voices and noises, which, while creepy as hell, isn't exactly far-fetched. After all, parrots and other types of birds are able to do the same thing. But to be honest, I just highly doubt that these were human spirits. We kept going back and forth, but the rest doesn't really pertain to this experience. I have experienced a lot of creepy shit out in the woods, but I highly doubt those were human spirits. I could be wrong, but it doesn't just feel right. The benefits of carrying a gun into the woods greatly outweigh the many risks of going in unarmed. The people who do disappear are more often than not the ones who decide to leave their gun home that day. One more thing, I forgot to mention that there is a small breeding population of black panthers around. I'm pretty sure at one point someone had a few of them as exotic pets that ended up getting loose. And around here, when there's not that many natural predators, they have no trouble surviving and reproducing. Very unlikely what we saw, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Anyways, if someone has any idea what we saw, or has ever experienced anything like this, let me know. Navajo kids know better than to play Skinwalker. One can lose their life. There are pretenders on the rest. It's not exactly what we did, but people who live a life that isn't meant for them, who aren't actually skinwalkers, evil medicine men, but they try to be. In our culture, Sheep and their skins are important to us. They're part of our life and our cultural practices. As a matter of fact, if you are a Diné, then I'm sure you're familiar with the belief of never sleep with the sheep's head by your face, or else it will wake and carry you away at night. I'm referring to the skin at least. So why am I telling you this? Using a sheepskin in a playful or disrespectful manner could lead to some consequences. You aren't just disturbing the spirits, you're playing with other forces that you can't see. If you disturb some of these items, be ready for what's going to come your way. Which in my case, this is a personal experience that even now to this day, I will admit, I haven't encountered him, or it, no more. Maybe it was just trying to scare me and teach me a lesson. I don't live on the rest no more, but I will be honest with you. Even though it's been years, almost a decade now, I feel like something has hitchhiked its way back to my home, where I'm actually at now. You see, when I was a kid, I used to live on the rest with my grandparents. I'm not sure what happened to my dad. I think he ended up moving to some other tribe and started a whole other family. At least that's the rumor. And my mom, well, that's a story for another day. So I had a friend named Tony, and we came up with the stupid idea on how I thought it would be funny to put on some animal skins and run around the housing area. For those who have grown up on the cities and played Ding Dong Ditch, or basically any other game that causes annoyance to your neighborhood, that was us. Lucky for me, my grandpa had 3 sheep hides hanging up on his shed. Only 2 of them were needed. Of course, Grandpa, and well, everyone knew not to mess with any animal hides or skins. Don't ask us why we did it. We just figured we would do some of those things. I mean, you know how kids are. We waited for my grandfather to go to sleep. He always fell asleep watching baseball. Once his head ended up hitting his shoulder, that was our green light. So we took the shed keys, grabbed the skins, and off we went. The stars were out and the moon was almost full, so we could kind of see in the dark. We walked around the different houses, whistling, hoping to scare those who were still out and about. The neighborhood dogs were also furiously barking, which actually helped. We ran across the roads, hid in the bushes, whistled from the dark, and we even knocked on some people's windows. At one point, Tony and I even went beyond and used a ladder to climb on the roof of a house. Well, the top of it. We ran back and forth on the roof. We could hear some screams coming from the inside. The children were scared, and my buddy and I just laughed and laughed. It actually makes you wonder how many fake skinwalker stories are out there, huh? So we were having the time of our lives. Well, at least we thought. Running around and causing trouble. But after a while, we figured the tribal police was going to be on their way. The neighborhood was already loud with the barking dogs and shouting, and we didn't want to stick around and get caught. Laughing and out of breath, Tony and I decided to head back home. As we were walking, Tony mentioned to me that it would be a good idea to go mess with that grumpy old man. He was referring to the one that everyone stayed away from, the one who's always sitting in the front of his home, seeing who walks by his land, by his property. He was the kind of person you didn't want to come across. He didn't like anyone, especially kids, and he made sure we all knew it too. If we ever passed by his home, or even rode the bikes too close to his fence, he would storm out, cursing and waving a broom or whatever else he could grab. His house was even surrounded by thick brush and a few trees. Well, not surrounded exactly, but off to the side of the house. Tony and I were hiding behind a tree off to the side. We tapped on his window and ran back to the tree and started laughing. No answer, no noise or anything. So again, tapped on his window and ran back. We took turns doing this, to see who would be the next one to be seen. We figured that the old man decided he didn't want to deal with the commotion because the porch light flipped on and illuminated the darkness. He came out, and he fired a gun. I froze. That was a warning shot. Whatever you are, get out of here. You don't belong here. Without even warning, Tony ran off into the bushes. Before I could follow right behind him, another one. I didn't even hear the bullets hit the ground or pass by me, so I assumed that he was shooting into the sky. I sat behind the tree. All the joy and excitement from just moments ago were now replaced by fear. And honestly, I was terrified. I was trying my best to control my breathing. The man started screaming again. That's what I thought. I heard the door slam shut. I peeked out to make sure it was clear. He had gone back inside, and the porch light was still off. I waited a bit longer to make sure that I was safe. I slowly stood up, shaking, almost wanting to cry. I checked again, and that's when I ran as fast as possible, not looking back. The damn sheepskin was a pain to run with. If that thing went missing, I knew I was gonna get whooped. Once I was far enough away, I stopped to catch my breath, inhaling through my nose and exhaling out of my mouth. I was trying to calm down. The only thing going through my mind was, damn, I could have died. We could have died. My heart finally slowed down and I had a clear head. Another thought was, where the heck did Tony go? Maybe he went home. That's when the wind began to blow and it got cold. Maybe I should go by his house and check if he's home. In mid-thought, my eyes caught something. On the floor was my friend's sheep hide, covered in dirt. I called out his name, but no answer. I picked it up and walked home. As I was walking, the dogs were barking again. I yelled at them, I'm done, go to bed. But then that's when their barks turned into howling. Then, that turned into cries. The whimpering did send a chill down my spine. If the dogs were scared, then I knew something was going on. My mind began to wander. I was starting to scare myself, thinking every shadow and noise was something bad. Scared, I began walking faster and faster. Suddenly, I heard Tony's voice. Hey, Jay, can I have the sheepskin back? I jumped, but immediately felt relieved until I couldn't see him. Tony, where are you? I'm over here. His voice was coming from the side. Get over here. You're freaking me out. This time Tony didn't reply for a while. Calmly, he then said, just throw it over, then we can go home. Being the gullible kid that I was, I threw it into the darkness and waited. Tony, hurry up, man. It's cold. Alright, Jeremiah, I'm coming out. While the bushes start to rustle, and a sheep comes out with its beady eye staring at me, and it's already loud, and that's when it starts laughing. I took off running, screaming my head off. It then chases me with the mixture of laughing. The dogs are barking at this point. I'm screaming, and I can hear its feet cracking as I'm running down the road, and that's when I stumble and fall. I didn't know what to do, so I just started crying. I'm laying there in the middle of the road, bawling my eyes out. The sounds are getting louder. Something does grab me. I scream. Looking up, it's my grandpa. The hell are you doing out here, boy? Your friend came over and said you were running around out here. Let's go. He does help me get back up. We get home, and I get whipped for being out. Another whipping for losing his skin. And then he tells me to go to sleep. Apparently, Tony had already been picked up by his parents. I didn't get to talk to him that night, so that night I didn't go to sleep. I laid awake all night and barely got any sleep the next few days. I swear, I can still hear those same sounds. A few weeks go by and I'm starting to get over what happened. I did talk to Tony the day after, and he said that he got scared when he saw the gun that the old guy had. He panicked, and he ran back home thinking I was behind him. When he got home, he told my grandpa what happened. Tony did say that he didn't see no sheep or anything. I started to question if these things actually happened. Maybe it was just something I made up in my mind in this crazy panic state I was in at that moment. Anyways, my grandpa and I go to town one day. We load up the groceries into the car, and I go push the shopping cart to the returns. As I push the car, I almost run into this older Navajo guy who was coming in between two cars. He's wearing a white cowboy hat, a checkered dark blue flannel, and has long braided hair. I look at him and say, I'm sorry, sir. He then looks down at me and says, be careful, Jay, or I might chase you down the street again. Last year, a friend and I went on a long road trip to New Mexico. We did go camping most of the trip, and the first night we got to camp, we spent in the Jefferson National Forest at a campsite in West Virginia. We had found some pamphlets for campsites at a gas station. and we drove out to a place called White Rocks Campground, which was like a 25-mile drive up a dirt road into the mountains. We were basically in the boonies. On our way in, we saw no cars except for one truck that was behind us for maybe about 15 minutes. But then it turned down a different road. We passed a huge coal factory with a sign that had said 62 days since an on-site incident. The only people that we saw on our drive were standing on the side of the dirt road. They were huddled around a plastic bin that was on fire. It was strange, but we were so excited about camping and just being on this trip. We were just laughing about how weird it was, instead of not being worried about having no cell phone reception, or being so deep in the mountains. We finally get to the campground and it seems completely empty. Not a single car or person to be seen, and this campground had about 30 sites. We drove around all of them trying to spot anyone, but when we realized it was just us, we picked a random site and just chose to stick it out. We got out of the car and stood there and just listened. The silence felt different. I love going outdoors, especially out in the woods and stuff. I never did feel scared out there, except this time, it was such a different feeling. There were no bird sounds. This was some Blair Witch shit. It was getting dark quick and we decided to start a fire and put up the tent to try to get comfy. My friend was in charge of the tent, and I was putting together the fire. While we were trying to go about our business, we would both stop and listen. My friend even made the point that if anyone was to get close to us, at least there were some crunchy leaves everywhere for us to hear it coming. Do you see where this is going? But it really did feel like somebody was watching us. It was the first time in my life that I understood what that feeling is. I did have goosebumps. I wanted to leave, but I kept my cool for my friend. As it turns out, she was also internally freaking out, but trying to keep it cool as well. Finally, the fire started. We set up the tent and our sleeping bags, and the sun had completely set by then. We sat around the fire together. The darkness seemed to close in so much that it felt like it was suffocating us. My friend then brought out a book to read, and it made us feel a little bit more comfortable. While she was reading, I grabbed my headlamp and would sometimes turn it on and look around me. I just had this feeling since we pulled into the campsite that someone was out there in those woods. It was pitch black, and our fire was a beacon. My friend and I decided, fuck it, let's go to bed. We'll just go to sleep quick, then pack up in the morning and get out of here. We did put out the fire, and I grabbed the one knife that we had on us that was still in the car, and I kept it beside me in the tent. After getting into our sleeping bags, my friend pulls out her cell phone to see if she has any signal. She tried to dial a few numbers just in case, and I remember saying out loud, "We have no reception out here. It's not gonna work." We lay there in silence watching her phone trying to dial out, but it would just disconnect. And if that was not the perfect fucking cue, suddenly about maybe 20 feet off to the left of our tent, there were footsteps. These were not footsteps that were quietly building up. These were footsteps more like somebody was standing behind a tree around us and started walking towards us. Those crunchy leaves were doing their job. We fucking froze, just stared at each other, eyes wide. The footsteps then continued walking towards the tent. Then they turned to go behind for maybe a couple yards and then they stopped. Silence again. These were heavy footsteps, with the same pattern that would be a person walking, not some sort of animal. My friend grabbed my knife that was laying by my back and grabbed her headlamp. She unzips the tent and gets out and stands in front of it, knife out, looking around the area. Damn, she is a warrior. It was maybe around 45 seconds of silence. As we listened for more footsteps or voices, I could see the light from my friend's headlamp dashing around the trees, but there was nothing. She then stuck her head back into the tent and said, "Let's get the fuck out of here." And in record time, we packed everything up in about 10 minutes, and we flew out. I'm amazed thinking back on it, how we didn't lose our heads. We tried to stay calm while packing, but still internally screaming in fear. We only had our headlamps on, and the whole time that we were packing, I kept thinking how the hill people could grab us and pull us into the darkness, and we were gonna be completely helpless if they did. It didn't feel like it was really happening. Maybe that's why we were almost completely calm as we were packing. Like there's no way this is actually happening to us on our first night camping. However, It still felt like somebody was watching us, but we did speed out of there once we were done. Now, here is where the hill people hunting us was confirmed. As we pulled out of the campsite, there were 2 black dirty trucks pulled off on the side of the road, hidden in the trees almost, but still clearly visible. They were definitely not there when we pulled in earlier, and the closest residential home was maybe about 15 miles away. We didn't see anyone around them, but we didn't stop to look. We got to a motel and stayed the night there, and we told the story to the motel owner, who was very sweet and nice, and even gave us some cash when we left the next morning, telling us to use it for another motel if we needed to. I promised that man that I would give him a good review. I'll attach the link down below if anybody wants to read it. I will remember every detail of that night for the rest of my life. The feeling that somebody was watching us, hearing those footsteps so close to us, and then the black trucks by our campsite after we packed everything up. So if you ever go to West Virginia, don't go to White Rocks Campground. Alright, so this is my first time posting here, so forgive me if I'm breaking any rules or etiquette. I told this story to a friend, and he said there were some people who might know what's going on in this story. He wouldn't say exactly, he just said that I'll find help here. I'll just tell you the story as I told him. I was about 9 years old, living somewhere outside of Oklahoma City. We lived with this old native guy that my father knew, just me, my sister, and the old dude that we'll call him Buck. Buck is a pretty cool guy. He taught me how to shoot, always had some old man jokes, and he also loved to watch some old western movies. He's really nice and lets us live there rent free, but he lives in an absolute shithole of a house. It's really ugly, poorly insulated, and a whole lot of pest issues. We lived with him for a few months, and things were going mostly smooth. One day, he tells my father he has a cabin out in the woods and plans on going out there for 2 weeks, like he does every year. My father thinks it would be a great way to get me and my sister into liking the outdoors, and he basically invites himself and us onto his trip. I remember Buck being a bit resistant, kind of like trying to politely tell someone no by making excuses for them, but my father insisted it would be great. So about a week or 2 later, we packed some stuff and went off on this trip. It was somewhere in Oklahoma, but I fell asleep on the way there, and I'm not great with names of places. It took a few hours to get there, but I'm not sure where it was. The last half hour was nothing but extremely overgrown, barely noticeable dirt roads. The cabin site was only about 1 acre, but it was directly right on a pretty wide river. The cabin itself almost looked like a rundown small mobile home, 1 story, a door, and a window, and directly on the ground. The main area was from left to right, a mostly clear circle with an outhouse to the far left. Some weird 10-foot tall skinny tower thing made from metal siding with a steel drum on top, with some wooden stairs leading to the top that is. A campfire area under the tower thing, a path down to the river, and of course, a rundown cabin. We parked at the entrance of the site and got out of the van. I kinda went around a bit while Buck and my father checked out the cabin. I joined up with the adults to see the cabin. It looked like some people might have discovered the place and trashed it or threw a party there. The table, the single chair, recliner, and the bed were all broken and torn up. A cabinet, which looked like it was once on the wall, was broken in half, and on the ground near the bed itself was shredded and had been busted open. There was canned food lying around the whole place. It was trashed and smelled foul, like old food. The adults came to the conclusion that either an animal got in and decided to nest in there while the food lasted, or some homeless people found it, and they also did the same. Either way, Buck didn't seem to care too much about the stuff. He then pulled out a gun and kinda checked the cabin out, kicking random piles of stuff and looking out the window and around the cabin. I assume he was making sure whoever or whatever animal was there was gone. After checking things out without finding anything, he and my father dragged some of the broken furniture out to the fire area and started putting it together for firewood. Buck showed me how to stack wood in the Lincoln log fashion, And then also in the tower thing, he showed me how to stack in the teepee fashion. I asked him what the second wood stack in the tower thing was for, and he just jokingly replied, for making soup. While the adults and my sister started to unpack things, I made my way down to the river. The bank of the river was down a slight hill, and to the right of the bank was a huge boulder, or maybe a slab of rock. I'm not sure what it would be classified as. It was a flat, rectangle but slightly rounded rock that was only partially exposed from the dirt, sort of like an oval with a bit more sharpness where you would expect corners to be. I heard Buck warn me not to go into the water because the river had a strong current. I walked over to the slab area and started smelling a rotting fish smell. I explored the tall grass and found some fish skeletons. They were huge with an extended mouth on them. There was barely any meat left on them, and they looked and smelled a few days old. I decided to leave them alone and went down to the river itself. If you've never seen river water in Oklahoma, it's not pretty. It's a light brown color and very cloudy. The river definitely had a strong, noticeable current that I didn't feel like testing my luck with, and it was also very wide. It might be a kid memory, but I remember it looking like it was as wide as a quarter-mile track circle they have in schools. There was nothing around the river except pretty dense flora. I made my way back up to the rest of the group and helped out. That night was pretty uneventful. We lit a fire in the fire pit, warmed up some canned ravioli, ate, and we also made some small talk, and then we went to bed. Since the cabin was still a mess, Buck ended up just throwing down a bedroll for himself near the fire. My father made a makeshift bed in the van, and my sister and I shared an air mattress on the ground outside. Falling asleep was as hard as you think when you never camped before, and you're in a new place not familiar with. Eventually, I did wake up, so I must have fallen asleep. Day 2 was also pretty uneventful. However, it was a bit more interesting. I lied down to go to sleep. I fell asleep and woke up what I assumed was a few hours later. It was much darker and a bit cold. The fire had burned down a good bit, but it was still going. I could hear my sister doing her normal soft snoring behind me. I was facing between the cabin and the path down to the river. There was a slight breeze coming from the river opening and making the long blades of grass sway side to side. This did very obvious things to my kid brain, because soon I thought I was seeing movement around the grass area. For context, the grass area was partially under some tall trees, so the grass itself didn't get hit by much of any moonlight, but the area behind the trees was open, because that was the air above the river, so light was coming through there and making the grass look like just shadows of grass blades. I'm assuming this is what did it for my kid brain, and it made me see things. I just lay there staring for a long time, seeing shadows dance around, and trying to make sense of what I was looking at. After a while, I didn't realize why the grass looked that way, but my imagination still told me something was there. After even longer, I started to drift off to sleep again, but after a few minutes, I pulled back to consciousness by a burning smell. It wasn't the fire, as I was very familiar with that. This was a different burning smell. It was sharper. I stayed still but looked around with my eyes. Eventually, that's when I saw a red orb, floating by the cabin back around one side, and then back around the other. The cabin was a bit away, so the minimal light from the fire didn't even hit it, so I couldn't get a great look. The floating red orb eventually made its way to where the door was, and it faded inside. I gently got up to go look because I was a dumb 9-year-old with almost zero fear. I prided myself on being stealth. I knew the basics of moving quiet, slowly roll my footsteps so they didn't make any impact sounds, and to stay out of any light. I carefully made my way to the cabin. The cabin was at ground level, so I didn't need to worry about a creaky wood deck or stairs. The window was also pretty low as well, maybe 3 feet high at the bottom, so getting up to see through it was not going to be a problem. As I got to the window, I stayed low and out of sight because I heard talking. It was a low mumbling. I wasn't able to make out the words, but I slowly stood up and looked into the window. Inside was the floating orb. I wasn't able to see anything besides it inside, simply because of how dark it was. The orb paced around the inside, slowly making circles, and the chanting was following it. The orb started making its way back to the door, so I moved around to the corner of the cabin. The door was already open, so I just had to watch and see. When it passed through the doorway, it did with a light footstep, and then a few more steps as it made its way fully out. Then, there was a dark figure standing a few feet in front of the cabin. The figure had a slightly outstretched arm, and the orb was floating with it. A second hand came around, and then it palmed the orb. And just like that, it vanished a few moments later. That's when a huge noise came from the woods on the opposite side of the fire. It sounded like someone kicked a soccer ball through the dense underbrush. It moved very quickly, crashing through the vegetation. A heavy sigh was let out, and what looked like a poncho was removed from the figure. The figure was more slim now and moved to the fire. It then shuffled around the stuff that we brought with us for a second, and then it went into the almost dead fire. The sound of wood stacking started up, and a few minutes later, the fire was back up to a healthy size. That's when the light illuminated the figure. It was Buck. He sat by the fire for a bit, looking into the woods. Eventually, I came out, and when I was questioned, I simply said I was trying to find a place to go pee. I was never that great at lying, especially in this case. A place where he knew that I knew where the house was. I was instructed to go to bed, and I did. On day 3, we went on a small hike parallel to the river. We walked for about an hour and then back for the rest of the day, and that night was also uneventful. Day 4, I woke up to the sound of water being poured. I got up to see Buck coming down the stairs to the tower with an empty bucket. He greeted me and went around the back of the cabin. A few minutes later, he came back with a bucket of water and went back to the tower, dumping it in the drum at the top. The drum was cut in half, and it lay down on its side. He was filling it with water. He told me he was going to test my fire skills first. He told me I had to go find and collect my own kindling to start the fire. This was one thing that I really liked about him. He would teach you anything he could, and make sure you had it down with random testing. I then ran off into the woods, collecting any small branches, twigs, and dry grass that I could find. I didn't go very deep, maybe 100 yards or so, when I started to smell a foul smell. After a few minutes of looking, I then started finding some old empty cans of food that weren't completely empty. I assumed some had gotten dragged off from the cabin, and this was the smell that I was smelling. When I thought I had enough, I ran back, and that's when Buck went over the instructions of how to layer things and how to get an ember burning. Once lit, we did random things for about half an hour, and Buck said that he was going to make some soup. He then climbed down the tower, stripped down to his underwear, and climbed into the barrel. I knew it. The tower and the barrel with the fire underneath was just a bath, and making soup was considered taking a bath. I thought the joke was sort of funny, and the day just carried on. That night, I woke up to coughing. My father was a heavy smoker, and would sometimes have some real bad coughing fits, but this one lasted a while, and he made some spitting sounds. I fell asleep after that. The next day I was woken up by my father asking if I was up last night. After confirming I wasn't, he said my sister had heard some noises coming from the woods and it wasn't Buck. I'm not sure why she didn't just roll over to check if I was there, but I never got that answer. After a bit, I climbed the tower because I hadn't gotten the higher view from the platform. I climbed up and saw Buck out there in the river with a canoe. I went and met up with him to see what he was doing. He said he and my father were going to tie a rope from one side of the river to the other and drop some fishing line along it, and told me I would be helpful in the project. We then got everything ready and tied a rope from our side of the river and got on the water. They were doing the rowing, and I wasn't the strongest and had no experience doing so. Once we were on the other side, Buck tied the other end of the rope to a tree. It was my father and my job to pull us across using the rope while he tied lines to it from behind. It took about half an hour of pulling us a bit. After we got back to our side, I asked why we brought so much food if we were going to go fishing. Buck told me it's a safeguard and to be ready as we could be. The rest of the day, as you guessed it, was uneventful. However, that night, I was awoken again by some coughing fits and some sounds by the house. I figured it was my father, and went back to bed. The next morning was early. We were all tasked with looking around the cabin site because there was a pungent smell around, and my father thought an animal had died nearby. Buck was on top of the soup tower scanning the area. My father and sister went and looked on the side with the outhouse, and I went around the back of the cabin. There wasn't much to be found on my side. There was an old pumping well behind it. I eventually made my way around and into the cabin. It looked mostly the same but with less broken stuff inside. I turned to leave and noticed what looked like a rug hanging up in the corner to the right of the door. I went over to it and discovered a small old wardrobe behind it. It was locked, but it was really old, and I pulled a bit too hard. The right door shifted a bit as the top hinge just pulled out of the wood. It was nearly rotted wood and was barely hanging on. I suppose it was still locked and closed, but now there was a gap at the top corner. I peeked inside and couldn't make out what I was seeing. I found a matchbook in the cabin and eventually got one lit and used it to see. The wardrobe was full of guns, rifles, shotguns, and a few handguns. I had found a gun cabinet, and a stocked one at that. I stood there just pretending I was identifying what was what, when I heard my sister scream. I ran out the door fast and saw her running from the woods. Buck made his way down the stairs as fast as he was able to and met her at the bottom, and began to ask her questions about what she saw. She said she saw a dead animal and something moving. My father came back a moment later and said there were a few dead rabbits a few dozen yards from the house, and that it just spooked her. Buck and my father went to dispose of the rabbits, and my sister said she saw an animal run behind the tree. She said it looked like a wolf or a dog. After a few minutes, the adults came back. Buck said he and I were going to go check the fish lines while my father stayed with my sister. I looked at him, and this was the first time I think I saw him worried. We got in the canoe and started on the closest line to us. The first 3 or 4 lines were empty, but the next few, he pulled these really long skinny fish up from the river. They were already dead, presumably suffocated from not being able to move much. We pulled up 6 in total. As a side note, after spending some time on Google, they seem to have been younger alligator gar. They were long but not as fat as the pictures on Google. We got back to our site by the river and laid them out on the stone slab thing. Buck said to leave them there to dry a bit, so we did, and I forgot all about them. That night, you guessed it, I was woken up by a bunch of random coughing, and some spitting fits and some clicking sounds. The next day, I finally had enough of feeling dirty, and made myself into some soup after getting everything set up and then cleaned. As I was getting out of the soup, I looked down to the river, and noticed that the fish were gone. I got dressed and went down there. Buck said he was ahead of me and he would be there in a minute. I saw the slab and the imprints of the fish were there, but the fish themselves were gone. The imprints were made of watermarks and what looked to be dry blood. Buck came up behind me, and I asked him about the fish that were gone. I took care of them. You can't just leave them out forever. But since we're here, let's go make another fish run. This time, we only pulled up 3 of them, and again, we put them on the slab to dry out, and went back. For the rest of the day, as you guessed it, was uneventful, other than a slight pungent scent, but that was pretty much it. However, that night, again, I woke up to the same coughing and clicking sounds. This time, between the sounds and the new batch of mosquitoes buzzing around, I decided to sleep in the van. I opened the passenger door and climbed in. When I laid the seat back, my father snapped at me that I had hit him with the seat when I brought it down too fast. I quickly fell asleep. The next day, as soon as I left the van, there was a rotting fish smell in the air. I went over to the adults who were making the food and sat by the fire. That's when my father asked me why I hit him with the seat the night before, and I told him I couldn't sleep because of his coughing and the mosquitoes. So I decided to go into the van. He said he wasn't coughing, and even if he was, I wouldn't be able to hear it from outside of the van, and the night should be cold enough that there aren't any mosquitoes out. I hadn't put that together with my tired kid brain. Buck said I'll most likely just have sensitive ears and a good imagination. He told me we had to check the lines again today. I was starting to get annoyed with checking the lines every day, but there wasn't a whole lot to do, so I didn't even argue. The process was the same. The fish were gone, but the stains were there. We got in the canoe and checked the lines. We pulled up one single fish this time and brought it back and put it on the slab. Buck was visibly upset when we dropped the fish on the slab. He stared at it a bit and said, "I hope this will do it," and sent me off to go help my sister find more wood for the fire. He and my father joined up together and talked a lot to themselves and then made their way into the cabin. When Buck saw that I was looking at them, my sister and I weren't very far into the brush, so I was still able to see most of the cabin site. I think by this point we were all done with the whole trip and annoyed. We came back to unload the wood we found, when I spotted Buck handing my father a pistol. They were a good bit away and spoke in a hushed tone, so I wasn't able to hear what he told my father. But he spotted us standing there and told us we would need a lot of wood for the night. We made a few trips until we had a stack about as tall as myself of good-sized branches. The night then came faster than the previous nights. Buck stayed up later than he normally did by the fire with a blanket over himself. My father told my sister and me to sleep in the van this night, and he and Buck would be out by the fire. I tried my best to stay up as late as I could. I knew something was going on. My sister fell asleep pretty quickly. I watched Buck and my father a bit, but I wasn't able to hear anything they were talking about. I got bored, and then I just fell asleep at some point. I remember waking up once and poking my head up. Buck was still sitting by the fire but sort of hunched over, like he had fallen asleep while sitting. I saw my father further behind him with his back to Buck. I figured he just got up to take a piss and laid back down and fell back asleep. I had gotten up and poked my head up again. I think I hadn't actually fallen asleep because my father was still out by the tree line, and Buck was looking like he rolled over onto his side. I laid back down and closed my eyes for a bit. I'm not sure if I fully fell asleep or not, but I started to hear some gentle tapping. I kept my eyes closed because I thought my father had come to check up on us, and he was tapping on the van to see if we would look. The tapping was 4 taps, sort of like when you tap your fingers. It started near the driver door. Then it would stop for a second or two. Every time there would be silence, the tapping would be at a different place of the van. The driver door, then the side panel, then the passenger door, then the back door, the side door, the driver door, the roof, the passenger door. This went on for a few minutes. I pretended to be asleep the whole time. Eventually, it stopped. I gave it a few minutes before I opened my eyes. I poked my head up. The last place the tapping had happened was the passenger side, which was the side the cabin was on. I shot down as soon as my father started having a coughing fit. This one was really bad, hacking and coughing really hard. The sound seemed like it was moving towards the woods on the driver's side. I figured he was gonna cough himself to getting sick. I poked my head up after another minute of no sounds to see Buck walking to the riverbank. I remember he said about the fish that the last few days he would be taking care of them, so I assumed this is what he was doing. But this time I wanted to be there to learn how, so I slowly and gently opened the back door so I wouldn't wake up my sister. I rolled out of the back and into my feet. Once again, I went into ninja mode and made my way over to the riverbank. I snuck over to the tall grass and saw Buck kneeling down on the slab. I was barely able to see because it was dark, but I knew he had just started. I could smell the strong fish scent and could hear the clicking, snapping sounds of cutting through the fish. I whispered over to him, "Hey Buck, I'm still awake and wanted to learn how to clean a fish." The clicking and snapping sound stopped. As a matter of fact, every single sound stopped. "We need a lot more. We need a lot more," he said. I stood and came around the grass, kind of annoyed. I actually felt like he didn't want to teach me, or he was implying that I wouldn't be able to do it. It was still pretty dark, so I couldn't really fully see him, just an outline hunched over on the slab. I had never gutted a fish at this point, and the smell was so strong. I know now that's not how fish are supposed to smell, but it was kind of fishy. It was like if you took some fish and left it outside for 2 or 3 days, and it would get a fishy rotting smell to it. Then you try searing it on a red hot nickel ball. It was terrible to anybody's nose. Need Allah. Allah. Need Allah. He said, Allah. Allah. I need Allah. He started having a coughing fit. A very deep-chested coughing fit. It sounded super close to the smoker from Left 4 Dead. He started rising to his feet, and that's when I realized I was just a short, fat 9-year-old kid. So a lot of stuff looked big, but it was big the way down the hill to the riverbank was. I was standing 3 or 4 feet higher than the slab in elevation, and he was still a bit taller than I was, and that's when everything clicked together. It was big. What little moonlight did hit it reflected it like it was glistening. It was dark. It took a step towards me, and I fell backwards on my ass. I think I tried to turn to run, but my body wouldn't respond to anything. I could only hiss out a quiet scream and shake as I looked at the bottomless pit for eyes. It then took another step towards me. Then from behind it, a flash of light, a burst of thunder. My ears rang and I was blinded. The ringing started fading before my sight came back. I remember the scream being worse than the gunshot. It was like a pouncing hunter from Left 4 Dead and one of the zombies from Half-Life, all layered on top of each other. My feet responded to me and started kicking me backwards. A second flash, then a third, fourth, fifth. I couldn't see or hear anything. I just kept kicking. There was a pause and flashes for a moment. Then they started from behind me. My eyes started adjusting a bit, and I was able to see split-second images. My father had come up behind me and was shooting. Then Buck, the real Buck, lit up his shots. They were way faster this time around. The thing jolted and convulsed in the flashes. It turned and ran into the river, but the gunshots continued. It was like watching a monster getting punched backwards by an invisible force, and then turning and running away, but only illuminated by a strobe light. My father grabbed me and dragged me back to the van. He threw me in, and I saw him and Buck unfolding the blanket. Buck was wrapped in it and pulled it completely over the van. They both piled in and closed and locked the door. Buck put a fresh magazine in the rifle, and my father did the same. I wasn't able to hear for a good minute or two. Finally, after playing everything out in my head, I just started crying as quietly as I could. No one talked other than the adults softly whispering to each other. Of course, my sister had woken up in the midst of everything and tried asking a lot of questions, but she was just told to be quiet. She finally stopped trying to talk after my father grabbed her around her mouth, got close to her face, and told her not to talk again while we were here. It seemed like hours passed in complete silence. My sister did eventually fall back asleep. My father, Buck, and I didn't even sleep at all. I lied down and tried to, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing again. After more time, I heard a slight tap. Then, some tapping. It started at the back doors. I gently turned my head up to look up front, and my father was slowly turning to face the back doors. It was silent for a moment, then it started up again right at the passenger door. Behind my dad, there was the sound of a match being lit. Buck was holding a lit match to what looked like a cigar. Once it was red and smoking, he began fanning the smoke around and saying something to himself. To be honest, I think he started praying. I guess it was in a different language. He also started tapping on the roof, tapping behind all of us. And after that, there was silence. Eventually, the sun got bright enough to shine through the blanket that was covering the van. My father leaned his seat back and rolled down his window. He grabbed a handful of the blanket and looked to Buck. Then they counted to 3, and he pulled it down while Buck was aiming with his rifle. There was nothing around us. They told me to stay in the van and they both got out. After a few minutes, they grabbed a blanket, loaded the van with the guns from the cabinet and a box that Buck had brought with us, and we left the rest. It took a long time to get back home, longer than it seemed to get there. I have had bad dreams for the first few nights back. My father told me to stay home from school that week. No one seemed to talk with each other. We just sat in silence and watched the old Western movies Buck always had on. After a few days, I was finally able to ask him what that thing was at the cabin. He then simply asked me, "What thing? At what cabin?" And that's when I just dropped it. After a week, my father traded the van for an old vehicle and a few hundred in cash. Then, we didn't enroll in school. We didn't even go see family before we left. We didn't inform anybody, any of our friends, anybody. We just took a trash bag with our clothes and moved to California. I haven't seen or heard about Buck since that day. That was 20 years ago. I have no idea if he's still alive, nor really any other of my family. I haven't spoken with my sister in a few years. I haven't seen my father in about 17. Everything just fell apart, and I don't even care about trying to keep in touch with any of them. So, was it paranormal? Or what the hell was that thing? You should at least once ask about it. There are some few issues. One of them being my sister didn't get to see what all happened on that last night. She knows stuff was weird, but didn't get first-hand experience. 2. I'm like 95% sure that Buck is most likely dead by now. He was around 75 to 80 years old when we lived with him, and that was back in 2002. And lastly, I don't have any contact with my father. He actually abandoned my sister and me in another state about a year and a half after all this happened. So maybe somebody listening to this can tell me what the fuck happened. Skinwalkers are not what you think they are. I know in the last decade or so there's been stories and rumors of dogs and how someone saw a skinwalker at home. Let's skip all of that. They're just humans. Well, not just humans, but witches, you can say, out here in the res. These skinwalkers also carry guns and knives. They are very dangerous, quote-unquote, creatures, but they are people. But they're under control of witchcraft. I truly think the only reason nothing happened to us that one night was because the Creator was protecting us. Let me tell you about this encounter I had with one. As a matter of fact, I'm going to smudge after I finish telling you this just to be on the safe side. Just because you never know, you should do the same as well. I was raised very traditional, with the rules and practices of rest life. We attended a few ceremonies when I was a kid, but I don't remember too much about them now. But what stuck with me the most was the power of smudging. My family held firmly to our traditions and practices to cleanse and protect. And even now, I still continue the same practice. Now me personally, I think it's safe to say the word skinwalker, because that's not their actual name. So it's not like we were saying the actual names of skinwalkers. But let me continue on with the story. I can't remember how the subject came up, but my wife started saying how she never experienced any of the stories that we grew up hearing on the res, especially the encounters with them. Not that she wanted to come across one, but we were just talking and sharing some stories. So she was telling me how she had never experienced anything like that. I told her not to speak like that because you might see it, to not even think about it because the mind can play tricks on you. It will leave you guessing and wondering about this, leave you curious. By the way, this was around 2007 when our traditional winter shoe games were on. We were in Farmington on a weekend, and it was close to the evening. One of our friends had called us and they wanted to play a shoe game with us that night at our hogan. So we were going home. It got dark by Little Water on Highway 491, my hometown. I knew the area good. I then said to my wife, "Let's get some sand from here for our shoe game." I took the turnoff by Little Water store. There was a road that went 1 mile that goes into a wash. We then found a good place to get the sand. We got off. I told her to hold a flashlight for me while I dug some sand in the back of my truck. As I started digging, we heard something in the trees and bushes that surrounded us. My wife pointed the flashlight that way and she said, "Is anyone there?" And that's when I told her, "Don't talk to it. It's most likely just some cow. And shine the light back this way." That's when whatever was out there made another noise in the bushes again. She put the light that way again and she said, "Show yourself, whoever you are." I then told her, "Leave it alone." She put the light back my way and I started putting some more sand in the truck. All of a sudden, I felt a cold chill down my back, a weird feeling I can't describe. Also, at this point there was a horrible smell that came across us. It smelled like rotten eggs, with vomit. I turned towards the trees, and this time I told my wife to shine the flashlight that way. About 50 or 60 yards away we saw someone walking. My wife kept the light on him as he was coming close. He then got closer and started walking by us. Not close to us, but we could still see some of the features of this man. He had a small dog walking on the side of him as well. He then bent down and picked up his dog. That's when my wife said, "That's a nice dog." He then looked at my wife and made a big smile to her. He didn't say anything back, and he just kept walking. I then quickly threw my shovel in the back and we left. As we drove off, my wife started saying something about the man that we saw walking by, but I quickly interrupted her. "Don't say anything," I told her. "Let's not talk about this until tomorrow." She gave me a confused look, but she stayed quiet for the rest of the ride. When we got home later that evening, that's when I decided to smudge. I let the smoke cleanse everything and said a few prayers. Afterwards, I called my uncle. He's always been a source of knowledge on all these things that happen out here. I told him everything, what we saw, what the man looked like, and how strange everything felt. I could hear it in his response, almost like he knew exactly what I was describing. He told me to be careful, and he reminded me of staying respectful. He then said, "Don't dwell on this too much, but keep smudging and don't invite anything in with your words or actions. And if you hear knocking tonight, or any strange noises, ignore it. Don't acknowledge it. I'm also going to pray and smudge as well, but continue in prayer." I knew what he meant by everything that he said. We had seen something that we weren't supposed to. The next day I told my wife that we just saw a skinwalker. She then said, "What if it was just a man walking to the store, or down the road taking a stroll?" So she didn't really believe me. So during the day I took her back to where we had parked, and then I walked her about 20 yards. I then said, "How did he just walk across this 8 by 20 foot wide wash? He would have had a hard time getting across. The jacket he was wearing was a piece of skin, because the hood had a nose and it had ears on it. His forehead also had red lines. And the dog, the legs were not moving at all. To be honest, I don't know what that dog was. But believe me, it was one of them." She then got scared looking down that wash. She actually said that she didn't feel safe no more, and said that we should just leave. I will say this, driving away from there did feel like someone, or something, was watching us. Anyways, y'all be safe out there, fam. Don't be out there looking for these things. So this happened when I was 13 years old. I was living in Mirandela, a small city in the north side of Portugal. I was in the 9th grade. I had a decent circle of friends, but I was a bit of a loner sometimes. I noticed a new girl had joined the class. She was cute, a brunette. She was also around my age. She always dressed in black, not to the point of piercings and black nails, but she was almost always dressed in black. I got paired up with her for a project in the first week and ended up talking. I found out that we had the same taste in music and movies, and soon we became very good friends. She didn't have a dad, and she had recently moved into town with her mom. She was very intelligent, far more than you would expect from anyone else her age. She was very excited about philosophy and got me into reading some of that stuff. At 13 years old, she was also a loner and didn't hang out with my classmates other than me, mainly because she seemed to be boring to everyone. Eventually, we became really close friends. One day, she invited me to her house for dinner. I was a bit surprised by how long it took to get invited to her home, given how often she dropped by mine. That evening, we met by the local school, and she led the way. We then started heading out of town. Half an hour later, we were walking around a tall grass field and dirt path as the night settled in. I couldn't help but feel a little scared since I didn't want to be out in complete darkness. She told me not to worry and kindly held my hand. After maybe another half hour, with almost total darkness setting in, we followed a dirt road into a forested area. The fear really started to kick in. I was about to beg her to go back when she suddenly said that we have arrived. In front of us was an old, big, degraded house. It was obscured by darkness, but it was a striking sight. It wasn't exactly a mansion, but it was still very big. The door was unlocked, so we walked in, and she turned on the lights. The interior actually looked pretty decent. There was a lot of old stuff, but all of it was very well taken care of. Unlike the torn up exterior, my fear turned into curiosity, and I couldn't help but feel intrigued by the house. I bombarded her with questions about it. The best that she could say was that it was passed down to her mom from a distant uncle a few years ago, and only now felt it would be fitting to move here. After showing me the bottom floor and proudly displaying her collection of LPs and VHS tapes in the living room and her organized bookshelves in the office, she then took me to the dining room. She asked me to wait there while she went upstairs to call her mom for dinner. As she left the room, I noticed how silent the house was. The only sound was the treetops in the surrounding woods being exposed to the wind, and the light hum of a generator, most likely around the back. I was somewhat confused by the whole situation, but I was far more intrigued by my friend and her mother's lifestyle than scared by it. In a moment, she came back and told me that her mom was working in the attic, and she wanted us to have dinner there. Now I was really confused. Why was her mom working in the attic, and why couldn't she come down for dinner instead? She explained that her mom was a dressmaker. She used the attic as her studio and spent the entire day there, not wanting to interrupt her work to go downstairs. The explanation was not satisfying, but I thought, alright, I guess. As we got to the upper floor, I noticed it was even more in a poor condition than the lower floor. The walls of it looked slightly dirty, and much of the wooden floor covering seemed to be torn off. She told me not to mind that area, and explained that her mom was still in the process of refurnishing the house. As we climbed up the attic stairs, it was very spacious, but it was very poorly lit. I was bombarded by a labyrinth of dresses hanging on washing lines and spread across the attic. Most of them looked ripped and dirty, definitely unlike anything a dressmaker would be making. A disgusting smell reeked across the room. I can't even describe how unpleasant it was. She just calmly made her way through all the clothes, and I tried to keep up while covering my face in disgust.
Hey Mom, here's a friend I told you about,
she said. I finally came out the end of the mess. I regretted doing so in the next second as my brain processed what I was suddenly looking at. Right in front of me was a decaying corpse, with almost more bone visible than horrendous rotting flesh, sitting on a chair in front of a small table with a lit candle. I couldn't even react to what I was looking at. Then she said,
now that we're all together, we can finally have dinner at last.
Talking to the rotting cadaver before her, I just blinked out. I was so full of fear, so full of disgust, that I just ran. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had in my whole life. I ran through the labyrinth of dresses and quickly headed down the stairs. I rushed to the front door and out the house as fast as I could. She was screaming at me, angry. I had no idea what she was saying, and I didn't even take time to listen. I smashed through the front door and ran into the surrounding forest, with no idea where to go. As I rushed into the woods, I ran through the pitch-black forest for what seemed like hours to my young teenager brain. I cried until I was out of tears. I eventually found the highway. The first driver that passed by noticed me on the side of the road. He stopped and gave me a ride back into town. When I got back home, my parents were shocked to see me arrive close to midnight, but they quickly understood something had happened when they saw me walk into the living room, covered in sweat with my clothes torn up from running through the middle of the woods. I told them everything that I went through. Needless to say, they didn't believe me about such a story, but they assumed that I was telling the truth. They figure I must have been the victim of something like a prank, maybe a morbid prank at that, or something similar. They then decided to talk with our teachers to track down her parents and shed some light on her inappropriate behavior. They went to the school the next day to clear things up. I was far too scared to leave the house. Even then, I was terrified to be home. I invited my best friend I had at that time, paranoid because she might show up. My parents came back and told me that she had enrolled in school by her mom early summer. The school management hadn't been able to contact her mom ever since. No phone calls were picked up, and given no one understood where her address was located at, every single letter that was mailed out were returned to sender. The school tried contacting her to clear things up that day. She remained missing throughout the rest of the week, the next week, and then she was gone for the rest of the month. I was overwhelmed with a mist of self-concern. On one hand, my juvenile brain couldn't help but imagine she might be up to something else. On the other hand, I was seriously scared and fearful for what could have happened to that poor, desperate lunatic. We did try filing a missing person report with the police, but we didn't have her face. Barely anybody spoke to her, and were still unable to contact her mom. Everything eventually faded, as we had nothing but her name to prove that she even existed. I never heard from her, and she was never seen again. It's been close to a decade since that happened. A few years after, I moved to the capital, but I still often go north to visit my family. I still know that town like the back of my hand, but I have no idea where that house is, and I can't even find it. The summer of 2008 was a rough time to graduate from college. I had just spent 4 years getting a degree only to find out that the job market had all but dried up. As bummed out as I was about being unemployed for the future, I found a deep appreciation for backcountry camping and hiking that summer. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains and graduating from a college in Montana, I was not a stranger to hiking or camping, but that summer was an escape. Going on daily hikes and camping beneath the stars really helped out my mental health, since I was worried about the purpose of my life and my future. It was June and unseasonably cold, wet, and cloudy. The daytime highs barely touched 50 degrees and at night it dropped below freezing. Despite the weather, I had planned to hike around the Anaconda Range that week and I wasn't going to let that stop me. My plan for the week, funny enough, was to hike from Storm Lake, over Storm Lake Pass, and down to Upper Seymour Lake. Storm Lake is a challenge to get to, and it requires a 4x4 pickup and some skilled driving. The road is a narrow 2-track way through thick pine forest. The way was slick with rain, but I made it to the top with little heartburn. I set up camp on the north shore of the lake and decided to do some fishing. The fishing was pointless. It was cold and nothing was biting. But the best thing about bad fishing is that my thoughts were free to wander around while I was just sitting on the shore. The rain was a constant light drizzle and created a natural white noise. As time passed, my daydreams were cut short as a low rumble from up the canyon overtook the sounds of the rain. The rumbling was like a distant diesel engine. There are no roads that go beyond where I was camping. No machinery or vehicles could be up that canyon. Maybe it's a plane, I thought, looking up into the rain clouds, but the sound wasn't getting closer or further away, and the sound wasn't above me. It was coming from beyond the lake and up into the canyon. The sound was stationary and constant. This was most definitely not a plane, or a truck, or a bulldozer. All of this wasn't outright scary, but my hair stood on end while I was just sitting there listening. After 20 minutes, the rumbling faded away, and I was left again with only the sound of raindrops. Soon enough, I caught a decent-sized trout, cleaned it, and headed back to camp to get ready for dinner. The fish cooked up fine, but to be honest, I hated trout. It's edible, sure, but not appetizing. They taste like mud. I ended up building my fire for the night. I sat back to enjoy the evening with a bit of whiskey. The night came fast. The mountain ridges put the sun to bed early, and the rain clouds would obscure the starlight. It was dark, really dark. The sounds of a crackling warm fire and the rain bouncing off my tent were a great comfort, and they were starting to put me to sleep. I reminded myself I needed to build up the fire before bed. I walked over to my pile of firewood and grabbed an armful, and being away from the fire's crackling, I started to pick up that all too familiar rumbling rising in the background. It was growing louder than before, and closer. Maybe I had too many pulls of whiskey and was tired and grouchy. But this noise, it was ruining my camping trip. Frustrated, I yelled into the blackness of the night, "Shut the fuck up, asshole." Like a switch being flipped, the rumbling stopped, and so did the rain. My heart skipped a beat. I realized that wasn't a coincidence. There was something watching me and responding to my screams, and I wasn't getting the most positive vibes. I threw all the logs on the fire and retreated back to my tent, more on edge than ever as I just sat there, listening to the fire crackling, to my breathing, and beyond that to the silence of the darkness. Before this moment, I was alone, but I felt safe. Now, I was alone and vulnerable. Beyond where the firelight faded, I felt like there were a million eyes in the darkness just watching me. My fear began to fade when the rain suddenly started pouring again. Not a drizzle, but a massive downpour. I was glad I built the fire up, or it would have been snuffed out for sure. My tent was being pushed down by the force of the storm. I thought about leaving to the truck, but I knew I would be soaked to the bone instantly. Risking injury or death over getting wet is the kind of logic only whiskey can produce. I could feel the rainwater pulling and moving under my tent. The feeling to get in the truck and drive away was there. I could get my stuff tomorrow in the daylight and spend a few nights in town. But I knew I had a bit too much to drink. Driving, especially on that slick, muddy 2-track road, would have been a death sentence. But I still needed a safer place to sleep than a wimpy tent. Grabbing what I could, I ripped open the tent flaps and ran for the truck. I was soaking wet by the time that I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Turning the heat on full blast, I was hoping that would dry me out. I knew it was going to be a terrible night. I reclined my chair and was trying to calm down, and my thoughts. The rain wasn't stopping. I was a little bit warm from the heater. The fire was still raging despite the rain and kept the campsite well lit. I remember the truck's clock reading 1:06 a.m. I blinked. It was only a moment, but when I opened my eyes, the rain had stopped. It was foggy and quiet. The once raging campfire was just embers, and there was morning twilight to the east. The truck's clock now read 5:45 a.m. It was morning. That couldn't be right. Almost 5 hours gone in the blink of an eye. I must have passed out. My head was just killing me. I didn't feel like I had drank that much to justify what happened. I turned off the truck and stepped out to survey the night's damage. My tent was completely flat. The tent poles were shattered to pieces. Everything was soaking wet. I dragged all my junk to the pickup and tossed it into the bed. My hike over the pass wasn't happening today, that's for sure. It was around 6:30 a.m. before I finished packing up camp. As I climbed into the cab of my truck, I heard that rumbling again through the morning fog. I drove out of there as fast as I could, down that muddy track of a road, not once looking in the rearview mirror once. I have never been back to Storm Lake, and I most likely never will. When I was a kid, my favorite time of the year had to be winter. There was just something about all the festivities that gave me a sense of wonder. It might sound a little cliche, or possibly a little cringy, but to me as a kid, the holidays felt magical. I would spend my winters watching my family put up all sorts of decorations around the house. Lights, ribbons, and I can't forget about the star attraction, the Christmas tree. My father and I had this tradition. Every year, we would venture out to our local tree farm, and he would let me run around and select our very own Christmas tree. It was one of the few times that my father and I had a chance to bond. He would tell me all these stories about his past, and how his own father would take him. Even though my father wasn't one to show emotion, I could tell that these trips to the Christmas tree forest actually meant the world to him. As the years progressed, my love for Christmas kinda diminished. I suppose that's something that just happens over the years. People get old, develop a new interest and responsibilities. During high school, I honestly couldn't care less about Christmas. To me, it was starting to just become another day, another pointless get-together with people whom I barely even know or remember. Maybe it was those rebel teenage years, but I just couldn't see the point anymore. That must have been the reason my parents stopped putting so much effort as they used to. Eventually, my father stopped offering to go Christmas tree shopping with me, and the holiday just sort of fell by the wayside. During my senior year in high school is when I met Sarah. She was incredible, and we instantly clicked. A few months after meeting, we began dating. Early into our relationship, I realized fairly quickly that her family took Christmas very serious. Every year I was amazed by all the decorations and how much they loved Christmas. It was honestly like something out of a Christmas movie. As time went by, Sarah and I moved in together. We had lived in different apartments over the years, until finally we had saved up enough money to buy a house in the suburbs. As the year started drawing to a close, and the winter holidays were fast approaching, I wanted to try and rekindle my old love for Christmas. Once December came around, we went out, and I bought a ton of decorations. We filled up the house from wall to wall with many different items. Decorations in every size hung in all the windows, and also on the doors. The lights had been strung up around the exterior of the house. It was most likely a bit too much, but I still had fun putting all the decorations up. Sarah and I had talked about what we were going to do about the Christmas tree. She offered to go buy a synthetic one at a store somewhere, but I told her I had a better idea. I explained to her about a weekend that my father used to take me tree shopping, and I told her how it used to be my favorite part of Christmas. Without missing a beat, she asked me when I wanted to go. We made plans to go shopping for one at the end of the week, and I'll be honest, that made me feel happiness I hadn't felt in years. Friday had arrived, and after getting home from work, Sarah asked me if I still wanted to go. I nodded, and with a smile, she grabbed her coat. We headed back out into the winter air and hopped into my truck. We drove 4 hours trying to find a decent tree farm. A few of them had already sold out, which was quite shocking to me. And other tree farms, well, their selection didn't look too great. After driving for nearly 45 minutes, we found a place. As we pulled into the lodge, the tires of my truck struggled to get any traction in the snow. Our shoes were crunching into the fallen snow, and we walked up to the gate. The trees that stood before us seemed to stretch in every direction. Sitting off to the side was an older man, who seemed to be reading a book by a portable heater. Sarah and I walked over to him, and he struggled to peel his eyes away from his book. In an effort to be funny, I asked him if he had any treats for sale, but the look that he gave me over the edge of his book didn't seem to be amused. With a heavy sigh, he rested his book into his lap and pointed out to the trees. Then he said, "Find one you like, and come let me know, and then I'll get it for you." I said thank you and entered through the gate, with Sarah following closely behind me. As we entered the forest, we both stared in wonder at all the options. Sarah quickly called me over and asked if this tree would be good. The tree was kind of tall to fit into our house. It was a great tree, but it was too big for the living room. We continued walking, looking around for that perfect tree. After a while, I realized I could no longer see the light from the entrance. The shift in the air was chill, and the warm glow of the light bulbs had been replaced by the cold moonlight overhead. Sarah rubbed her arms in an effort to stay warm, and I was beginning to realize that we needed to decide on a tree pretty quickly before one of us freezes out here. Then, we saw it. The perfect tree, only a few yards ahead of us. I grinned as we got closer. But as I was getting closer and closer, I heard Sarah whisper for me to stop. My feet stopped in place, and I turned back to look at her to see what was wrong. Sarah was staring off into the distance, her face more pale than I had ever seen before. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring. I followed her gaze and saw what she was looking at. Between a few trees off in the distance, two eyes were looking right back at us. The shadows cast by the trees around it were obscuring its body, but its eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness. I looked back to Sarah and she managed to whisper, saying that we should leave. I turned back to look at the eyes in the darkness. They were still there, still wide, and still staring directly at us. Then, the eyes began to move out from the trees. As they did, they started to rise higher and higher above the ground. After a few seconds, the eyes were nearly half as tall as the tree it stood next to. It stepped out into the moonlight, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Its body was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It looked like some kind of beast. Dark fur covered it from its head to its toes. Massive clawed hands gripped the tree next to it, and I could see the tree strain from the pressure. Large horns were protruding out from its head, curling up and back from its body. It exhaled a deep breath through its nostrils. The gust of warm air visibly obscured its face for a moment. It took another step closer. The twigs beneath its feet were crunching loud as it approached. I could see its face a little bit better now. A dark liquid dripped from its lower jaw, staining the pure white snow beneath it. Sarah took a step back, and I could hear a twig snap below her foot. I turned my attention to her, and she was nearly crying at this point. The twig snapping was like a trigger. The creature started to roar, and this drew my attention back. That's when it started to run at us. But it wasn't running like a fucking animal. It was running like a person. And looking at this, my eyes went wide with panic, and I turned to Sarah, yelling at her to run. We both began sprinting through the snow, dodging the numerous trees as they passed us by. Even though we were both running as hard as we could, I could still hear that thing's footfalls growing closer and closer to us. Then, the sound of splintering wood echoed from behind us. I turned just in time to see a massive tree falling towards us with immense speed. I called out to Sarah to look out, and she moved away from it, when I did the same thing as well. The tree impacted the ground, and it shook the earth beneath my feet. I called for Sarah, asking if she was alright, and for a moment, there was no answer. I called again, and that's when a response came. I ran around the fallen tree, and I found her sitting near another tree. I held out my hand and helped her up. That's when we heard another loud shriek, coming from deep in the woods. We looked to one another before running out of the forest back into the light of the entrance. The old man looked up from his book and asked us if we found one we liked, but we paid him little mind as we ran out of the fence, hopped into my truck, and drove away. There's quite a bit of few different things in this world that I can't explain, and that night is at the very top of this list. I have no idea what that thing was. Maybe some of you out here have an idea, but I'm at a complete loss. I still love the holidays and Christmas, but this year, I think I'm just gonna buy an artificial Christmas tree, and I would advise all of you to do the same. Stay away from the forest, and be careful when you go in there, if you go in there to look for a Christmas tree. This happened a few years ago in South Utah. My family and I have some friends that live on the Navajo Res, near the bottom of Utah. Our family is in Navajo, but my parents had met some friends a while back who are. Now, my parents had always told me about the legends that their friends had told them. I was never really scared of them because, to be honest, I didn't believe they were real. Well, we had talked to our friend Joey about coming down to the res and camping with him for a few days. He was on board with the idea, and we made plans to drive from Salt Lake City down to the campsite, which was about 10 miles into the res. It was a pretty normal road trip most of the way, and we stopped by a few towns to take pictures and eat. But we had decided that we were going to make it to the campsite in one day. We had been driving from 6 in the morning to 3 in the morning, and we were all tired as hell. I had been sleeping in the back while my father drove and was talking to my mother. My parents started to wake me up because they said we were about to pass the welcome sign to the Navajo Nation. I looked out the window and waited a few minutes before I could see the sign, and kept my eyes on it until we passed. I remember watching the sign, waiting to feel the bump in the road where the pavement changes. As we passed, the back of the sign came into view, and I looked over the backseat to watch the sign until it was out of sight. But when I turned around to look at it, I saw something standing behind it. It looked like a deer standing on its hind legs, but it looked broken. The entire form of the deer looked wrong, and I could see that it was staring at us, and I stared at it for a few seconds while it was still illuminated by our backlights. I turned back around and wanted to tell my mother what I had seen, but by the look on her face I could tell that she had also seen it. My mom explained what we had both seen to my dad, who said it was most likely a statue or something and that we were just tired. My mom insisted, and my dad said we would ask Joey about it when we got to the campsite. While we pulled up to the campsite, Joey and 2 of his friends were sitting around a campfire talking. We were welcomed, hugged, and greeted each other and began setting up our tent. Once we had everything set up, my mom and I got into the same tent and started to go to sleep while my father stayed outside to talk to Joey for a little bit. I wasn't really listening as they were talking, but I started to pay attention as my dad began asking Joey about this thing that we had seen. Right as my father got to the description of it, Joey became quiet, and I could hear him whispering to my father in a hurried tone. All I could hear my dad say, "But we just got here." About a minute after that, my dad quickly got into the tent with us and told us that we needed to go. My mom and I were annoyed by this. That's until we saw that Joey and his friends were also packing up their stuff as quickly as they could. I asked what was going on, but the only answer I could get was, "Just get in the damn car right now." The scariest part at that moment was the way Joey was looking around the campsite. I had never seen my dad, or anybody else, move so quickly and pack everything up. As soon as we got everything in the vehicles, Joey told us we needed to stay somewhere off the res, and that he and his friends would escort us. He made it very clear that we needed to stay on the phone with him until we got to a hotel. We all agreed and began to drive back from where we came. It was mostly a silent ride until we started coming up on a wall of rocks in the road. As soon as we could tell what it was, Joey started screaming in the phone that we needed to either go through it or go around it, but that we needed to do it quickly. My dad drove around the rocks, carefully moving the vehicle, trying not to pop a tire, while still trying to make it out of there quickly. As we started pulling back onto the road, that's when we heard a scream, or more like a screech, coming from in front of the vehicle, maybe about 50 feet away. Joey only said, "Keep driving," which was enough to prompt my dad into driving faster than he had ever driven before. We made it to a hotel, and Joey refused to speak about what just happened. The only thing he said was that we needed a blessing of some sort before we left. We didn't want to, but seeing what happened earlier, we were going to go with whatever Joey wanted. I never really believed in, well, I'm not going to say their name, But after reading up on them and comparing the stories online to my own, I firmly believe they're out there. Some people would call me a professional outdoorsman. I spend a lot of time out in the wilderness, fishing, hiking, camping, but best of all, hunting. I love to go hunting, ever since I was a kid, even though I have my father to blame for that. While other children were out riding bikes or having sleepovers, I was clutching a rifle next to my father to stay warm in the cold mornings. My father and I spent almost every fall together up there on the mountain. He would teach me about the various wildlife and all the different types of plants, which ones were safe and which ones weren't. He also taught me how to track and how to maintain firearms. I remember the first time I saw my first buck. He stood there between two rows of trees, only 50 meters away from me. I leveled my rifle at him, looked him square in the eye, and squeezed the trigger. I missed, and the deer ran off into the woods to live another day. I felt defeated that day, but my father, even though he was strict, was very understanding of my shortcomings. He told me even the best hunters in the world miss. That made me feel better, at least a little bit. The years seemed to fly by, and I had hunted nearly every type of game in those mountains. Even though I was having fun, I never let a kill go to waste. I would always bring back what I killed to stock my freezer for the following months. After high school, I got a job working as a camp supervisor on the mountain. It wasn't anything amazing. Mostly, I would just sit there and read magazines all day, sometimes having to tell a group of frat guys to keep the noise down, or reminding the scatterbrained father to keep an eye on the campfire. Like I said, it was pretty boring stuff, but I did get to be closer to nature almost non-stop. And not to mention, the campgrounds closed at the start of the fall hunting season and reopened the following year. I had just packed up my truck and said goodbye to my mom. I did this every single year, and yet my mother would always tell me how much she worries about me. My father, on the other hand, would always tell me not to come home unless I bagged something bigger than my truck. The following morning, I woke up an hour or so before dawn, got in my truck, and drove to the mountain. I had my own personal spot I would park my truck at, which was a narrow path that ended about halfway up the mountain. I hopped out, grabbed my gear, my rifle, and took a deep breath before walking into the woods. Around 20 minutes of walking, the sun had just started to creep over the horizon, its rays igniting the sky above me. That was always one of my favorite parts about being outdoors so early. I continued my hike through the terrain, over logs, and through the dense brush. It wasn't long after I arrived at a clearing. I figured this was a good place as any to set up camp for the night. Whenever I go hunting, I stay out for a few days at a time, just to give me more opportunities. I had quickly set up a small one-man tent and created a small fire pit. The sun was almost directly overhead at this point. Even though I was still busy situating my surroundings, I couldn't help but feel eyes on me. I backed out of my tent, my rifle in hand, and scanned the tree line around me. Another good lesson that I picked up from when I was young was to always trust your instincts out here when you're hunting. I thought maybe a bear was getting too curious for its own good. I grinned at the thought of my dad's face if I managed to actually bring back something as large as my truck, but I quickly reminded myself how dangerous these animals could be. I stood there motionless, listening and scanning everything around me. After 5 minutes of nothing, I returned to my tent, but still more alert than ever. Finally satisfied with how my camp looked, I quickly scarfed down 3 protein bars and a bottle of water before venturing into the woods. It wasn't long before I caught the trail of a small herd of deer not too far ahead of me. I took notes of each broken twig, grazing spot, and pile of droppings along the way. Just as I was about to peek my head through some underbrush, A deer jumped out at me. This caused me to jump and fall on my back hard. Before I knew it, 2 more of them followed as they all scampered past me, disappearing into the woods before I could even ready my rifle. Rising to my feet, I couldn't help but notice the strange behavior. Normally, deer don't run towards a hunter like that. Usually always they run in the opposite, unless something else has scared them first. I peeked my head back through the underbrush and noticed something strange. There was a deer lying on the ground in a pool of its own blood. Its entire throat and chest seemed to have been torn from its body. I could feel a mix of curiosity and concern rise in my mind. I wonder what could have possibly done this. And I also wonder how I didn't hear it happening with how close it was. While I was lost in thought, I heard the rustling of twigs and leaves on the far end of the deer. I looked up and caught a glimpse of something, only for a moment. But whatever it was, it looked gray. Maybe a wolf. But it still doesn't explain why I didn't hear it, nor why it didn't stick around to eat its prey. I decided it was best to start making my way back to camp. The sun was now on its descent, and I didn't want to be out in the woods after dark. It's very easy to get lost at night. The twilight was growing in the sky with each passing moment. I tried to quicken my pace, but I knew I wasn't going to make it back to camp before the sun had fully set. Still, I continued on, trying my best not to think about the possibility of a wolf lurking around, because if there's one, there's most likely a pack around. I began to get that feeling again of somebody's eyes on me from some unknown location. I could feel my hands gripping my rifle as I continued to walk. Then, a rustling of leaves and crackling of twigs caused me to stop and aim with my rifle. It was 2 squirrels chasing each other around the tree. With a heavy sigh of relief, I lowered my guard and turned back. But when I did, I saw something that froze me. There was something attached to a tree directly in front of me. It looked like a man, but not really. Its body was a grayish blue color, and it was gripping onto the tree with large claw-like fingers. I felt sweat run down the side of my face despite the cold temperature outside. Its head was twitching about as if it were looking for something. Slowly, I raised my rifle towards it, but when I did this, it caused the creature to stop twitching its head and look directly at me. Its eyes seemed to reflect the light from some unknown source. They shimmered lightly in the dusk. I wasn't sure what I was actually looking at, but my instinct told me that it wasn't friendly. I steadied my breath, lined up the shot, and fired. The gunshot echoed through the forest as birds and other creatures scurried away from the sound. The bullet hit the creature, and when it did, a new sound replaced the gunshot. The creature let out a shriek. I chambered another round, not wanting to take a chance. Yet when I did, the creature was gone. I scanned the trees and the nearby ground, but there was no sign of it. I know I had hit it, but I wasn't about to stick around to make sure. I continued my journey back to camp, but when I got there, I found my entire campsite completely ransacked. My tent was shredded, and all my supplies had been scattered about. Just then, I heard something behind me. I slowly turned and was only a few feet away from this creature that I had just shot. It was on all fours, crawling, still twitching its head as it moved. I could see it much more clearly now, even with the light missing from the sky. The skin on its mouth looked torn, and its jaw was hanging loosely as it was breathing silently. Its eyes were completely white, almost as if it were blind. I shifted my body slightly to face the creature, and when I did, it stopped crawling. Its milky eyes were looking directly into mine, and in a split second, I pulled my rifle up and fired, but that didn't do anything to stop it. It leaped through the air and knocked me down. Its large claw-like fingers were scraping at me while its mouth, filled with razor-sharp teeth, snapped in my face. I was trying my hardest to keep it from biting me, by holding it back with the body of my rifle. But this thing was strong. I rocked from one side to the other and used the momentum to throw the creature off of me. It scrambled to its feet, but I was faster this time. I took a quick breath and squeezed the trigger, catching the creature in the head. It wheezed and fell back. That's when I got up and began running towards my truck. I looked back only once, and when I did, of course, I saw no sign of the creature I had just shot. Panic set in as I jumped over logs and tore my clothing on branches. I was just praying that I was going the correct way the entire time. As I was running, I started to feel more and more eyes on me, as if the entire mountain was now aware of my presence. I went around a small hill and almost screamed when I saw my truck. I got into it and drove out of there. When I made it home, my mother was happy, and my father was concerned at all my cuts and wounds. I told him that a bear had attacked me and that I had narrowly made it back. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I really saw up there. Weeks went by, and I couldn't shake what I had experienced. I doubt I ever will. I have since quit my job at the campgrounds and have started looking for jobs closer to town. I have hunted everything up on that mountain, but that night was the first time that something had hunted me. I don't think I'm ever gonna go back to that mountain, and if you plan on going into the wilderness, be careful. A wolf or a bear aren't the only things lurking within the trees. I've been a park ranger for the better part of a decade. It's both a demanding job and one filled with enjoyment. I'm sure some people out there don't care too much about the great outdoors, but I do. I remember back when I was a kid, I would spend countless summers begging my parents to take me camping at the park. My mother wasn't too thrilled with the idea, but my father would still take me, even if she wasn't up to it. My dad and I would spend almost every summer out in the woods, hiking and fishing. It was the age-old cliche of father-son bonding time, but I suppose it's a cliche for a reason, right? I never grew tired of it, even as I grew up. Eventually, I learned that you could make a living working in a place like this. At the time, I had very little concept of park rangers and what they do. To me as a kid, I just thought that they were police officers with funny hats. Don't tell anyone, but I still kinda think that. After high school, I went to college, and during my last 2 years, I was lucky enough to get a job as an intern at a park not too far from the school. I would mostly do errands, but often the rangers would take me out on ride-alongs. We would drive around in a pickup truck and just enjoy the scenery. Sometimes, they would have to tell a couple of people to hit the bricks, but other than that, everything else was a breeze. After finishing college, I applied to become a ranger myself, and was lucky enough to be selected. It's a highly competitive market, so being chosen was huge for me. My very first day on the job, I'll never forget it, mostly because everyone I worked with never let me forget it. I was walking out of the ranger lookout. I guess I wasn't paying attention, and I missed a step. I tumbled down the stairs, spilling my coffee all over me. I swear the laughing could be heard for miles. Aside from that unfortunate misstep, it's been an enjoyable ride, to say the least. Over the course of my career, I dealt with numerous events. The first major one that I could remember would have to be the time a group of kids had gotten a hold of some fireworks, which aren't permitted in the park. They had set a few of them off, and we were called out to investigate. We arrived at the location not long after the report was made, and lucky for everybody, no damage was done to the park or the kids. We escorted them back and called their parents to come pick them up. One kid damn nearly wet his pants when I told him that I spoke with his mom. I couldn't blame him. She sounded like the wrath of God even when she was speaking to me. Other than that, there have been a few domestic disputes at the nearby campgrounds. Those happen actually quite frequently. People often get stupid when they get drunk, so we calmed them down or asked them to leave. And since they don't want to pick up camp, most of the time they just go to sleep. But the worst day was a couple of years ago when a local kid from a nearby town had gone missing. We were all called in to be part of the search effort. Apparently, the boy had wandered into the woods and had gotten lost. We searched and searched for days, but in the end, were unsuccessful. I still remember his face on the flyer that his parents had made. But that brings me to the scariest day working as a park ranger. I'm sure that's why you're all listening anyway. It was a slower day in between spring break and summer vacation. During that time, there's a lot of visitors, so our roster was somewhat spread out. Not to mention, we had some people retire recently, which actually left us pretty short-handed. I was stationed in the main ranger building at the entrance of the park, while Alan, another ranger, would be at the lookout further inward. After checking in and getting situated at the start of my shift, I watched out of one of the nearby windows as Alan hopped in one of the trucks and drove it to the lookout. I waited around 10 minutes before getting on the radio and telling him that one of his taillights was out. Another few minutes passed before he hopped on the radio and told me that he was halfway up the stairs, then had to head back down to check, and they were both fine. I laughed through the receiver, and I could hear him already pulling a prank on me. The day progressed and I did a few patrols in the mornings, just to take some time to enjoy my surroundings. The nearby lake was glistening with the morning sun. Along the trail, I saw two hikers who returned a friendly wave as I drove by. I stopped by the campgrounds to see if we had any new campers. I was surprised to find it empty. Regardless of the time of year, there's at least one die-hard outdoors person staying here, but not this time. I didn't pay it much mind. After all, it was less work for me. Once noon rolled around, a massive cloud seemed to appear out of nowhere. They didn't look to be storm clouds, but were thick enough to block out the sun's rays. I dreaded having to drive around in the rain, so I hoped the weather would be okay. Nighttime was fast approaching as the overcast sun descended. I radioed to Alan to see if everything was fine, and he reported nothing out of the ordinary. The park after sunset was very beautiful. The stars that normally fill the night sky are a sight to behold, and the sounds of the nocturnal forest coming to life as a sound is something I'll never forget. About an hour after sunset, Alan got on the radio. "Hey, John," Alan said. "What's up?" I replied. "Come out here, man," he said. The way Alan spoke was strange to me. He sounded a bit nervous, a little bit off. Maybe his nerves were getting the best of him. "Alright, I'll be out there in a minute," I said as I exited the ranger station and hopped into the truck. As I drove out to the lookout, I radioed Alan again to ask him if everything was alright. But the radio just crackled in response. I sighed, thinking he might be using the bathroom or something. Once there, I parked a few yards away from the tower's base. I hopped out of the truck and turned on my flashlight. As I was approaching the stairs, my boots sloshed into the muddy ground. This caught me off guard, as even though there were clouds in the sky all day, it hadn't rained a single time. I lowered my light and saw that the ground had a strange tint to the mud. What was weird was that as I looked at it, I noticed that the muddy ground seemed to lead away from the tower. I followed it to a nearby tree line that surrounded the tower itself. And between two trees, I saw him. Alan, or what was left of him. His body was torn to shreds. His face was completely torn. If not for his uniform, I doubt I would have recognized him. As I was standing over my bloody coworker, the radio crackled to life. "Hello, John," Alan's voice came through. My breathing stopped. "Are you almost here?" he asked. The voice coming through the radio was definitely Alan's, but that was impossible, as I was currently staring at his remains. I snapped my head and looked up to the tower above me. Even though it was dark outside, I could see someone inside of it, a silhouette, standing still through the glass. I then got on the radio. "Alan, are you in the tower?" "Yes," came the response. As soon as whoever it was responded, I made a dash to my truck. As I ran, I looked up and watched this thing run towards the tower's door and begin to descend the stairs. I barely managed to jump inside the truck before whatever it was reached the bottom. I quickly started the engine. To this day, I'm still not sure what was standing in front of me. Its skin was gray from head to toe. Its body seemed muscular, yet lanky at the same time. Long arms and legs protruded out from its torso. I could see the flesh expand and contract with each ragged breath it took. Its face was by far the strangest. Large eyes. The lower half of its face was just a mesh of teeth, some even puncturing its own skin. It raised a long, clawed hand to its mouth, and I could see it was holding something. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life. It said in Alan's voice, "John, are you there?" I floored my truck and ran into the creature as hard as I could. The metal on the truck creaked for a moment before the thing fell to the ground. After that, I reversed out of there, spinning the truck around and driving until I was completely out of the park. I was interviewed by different law enforcement agencies about the events of that night. I tried my best to be honest, but hearing myself explain to the local police that it was a monster sounded insane. The authorities determined that it was most likely an individual who was crazy that attacked Alan, and when they went to go find him, he was nowhere to be found. It's been almost a year since that day, and I have since moved 4 states away, getting a job at a smaller park. Some of you might think that's crazy, but I do still love the outdoors. I just refuse to work once the sun goes down. I try to look up reports of similar incidents, and the closest thing I could find were stories or legends about strange creatures that are called wendigos, the rake, or skinwalkers. I have no idea if that's what I saw that night or not, but here's some advice. If any of you are planning to visit one of your state parks this summer, I would highly recommend it. However, if you're planning on camping at one overnight, please be very careful and never trust the voice when you can't see its face. Do you know what it means when you see a white owl in the res? Depending on what tribe or res you're in, when it comes to the white owl, it can mean death, or some other kind of different meaning. Sometimes they're messengers. They bring messages from the other side. There's even been stories about how when people see one, someone close to them passes away. I even heard about how they're not evil, but more like messengers about an illness or a death that is coming. So basically people end up connecting the owl with it being evil. Well, I'm not here to talk about the messengers, but if someone ties in with the story, even now that I'm writing this out, a lot of it makes sense. When I was a kid, I used to walk around the summer nights. I would tell my mom and dad what I was doing. Mom always said it was fine, and dad always said to be careful. I would go out and about till midnight. I have described the Pine Ridge before in my stories, at least over here where I'm at. Some cedar and down by the creek that flows through the whole community. There's oak, elm, and cottonwood trees along the dry creek beds that seem to be everywhere. On one night, I was making my walk in the dark. It's peaceful to walk under the stars and moon. Then I made it home to find my dad sitting on the front porch. The dogs were barking and I asked him what he was doing. He then said in a stern voice, "Waiting for you." Shit. I thought I was in trouble, but he just got up and went inside. Out here in the res, when dogs start barking at night, you better pay attention. They're picking up on something that we can't see. Something moving around out there. And at night, you know if the dogs are barking, it's for a good reason. If you lived out here on the res, you know that barking isn't just noise. Because if all of a sudden they stop and everything goes quiet, that silence can feel even scarier than the noise. It makes you wonder what made them stop and what's still out there. Anyways, I woke up and did some things around the house. When the evening time rolled around and I was getting ready to do another walk in the dark, as I was going outside, my dad was sitting out there again. The dogs up and down the creek were going crazy as well, barking like they were scared. I was ready to go when my dad told me to sit down a minute before I left. I could see that he wanted to talk about something, but I could tell he was trying his best to figure out how. He told me right off that he didn't like me walking around late at night by myself. Before I could ask him why, he told me a story. And I'm not sure about you, but when your elders speak, you listen. My dad started talking about when he was a teenager like I was at that time. He would get his horse, saddle up after the chores were done, and go visit his friends late into the night. That was how he spent his summer evenings. One night he was on his way home. It was late. The full moon was just rising in the east. It was about 1/4 of a mile from when his horse stopped on its own and started staring into a dry creek bed. He sat up on his horse and looked down into the dry creek bed, trying to make out what his horse was looking at. His horse snorted and did a little hop. He got his horse under control. It was still looking into the dry creek bed. My dad thought he saw something moving, but he wasn't sure what it was. It was white, and it seemed to be moving in the trees below. He continued watching, when all of a sudden it jumped up into the air and came towards him. It did scare the horse. It took a few quick steps to the side. He reined it in while the white thing came at him. It was a bit unnerving, so he relaxed his grip on the reins and let the horse go. He got about 20 feet when the white object came out of the dry creek bed behind him. He looked at it as it came closer, and it was a huge white owl, flying. Something about it scared him off, so he took off. It flew behind him as he rode his horse. Eventually it flew over him. It was a pretty big owl, he said. The wingspan was as long as his horse was from tail to nose, and the body looked like about 3 feet long. That said, it flew off, directly towards the moon, and eventually it disappeared. He just sat on his horse as it was flying away. Once the weird feeling wore off, he continued back home. Home was at the bottom of the hill, surrounded by the creek on the north and west. To the south were pine-covered hills, a dry creek bed to the east, and a big alfalfa field that was fenced off. He got to the top of the hill, and then his horse already snorted, jumped sideways, while looking towards the alfalfa field. The moon was slowly coming up, but all he could see was deep shadows in the field along with the haystacks that were there as well. He couldn't see anything but thought it was deer running around that was causing his horse to spook. He looked in the same direction that the horse was looking at. When it snorted, and it jumped again, he grabbed on with his knees, looking towards where the horse was looking. In the slowly rising moonlight, he could see something laying on top of the haystack. A slight breeze from the south came and his horse snorted again, and then it took off towards the house. He just held on to the reins and let the horse go. It slowed down long enough for him to get off, and then it took off behind the house. He went inside. His mom asked him what was going on, and he told her what happened and what he saw in the field. As he was telling my grandma what he saw, he said the dog started barking like crazy. He said this just made the whole situation worse. That's when she called for my grandpa. He came out of the bedroom, and she told him what happened to my dad. Grandpa got out his gun when he heard about the figure lying on the haystack. He told my grandma and dad to stay inside while he went to see what was going on, and then he walked outside. The moonlight was brighter now as he walked out of the house and down to the fence line for the alfalfa field. He opened the gate and started walking out into the field, looking around at the haystacks that were closest to the house. The 4 haystacks that were directly south of the house were clear from what he could see in the moonlight. Grandpa started walking towards the 2 haystacks that were northeast of the house along the dry creek bed. The first haystack he didn't see anything, but as he got within 50 yards of the second haystack, he thought he saw something peeking over the top but slowly sliding down. Kinda like when you peek over something but slowly bring your head back down. Grandpa focused on the haystack, watching in from the open field around it. Then he saw it again. Somebody's head in the shadows, slowly peeking over the top at him. He then spoke to the shadow head, telling him to come down off the haystack. The head disappeared, and when he said that, Grandpa spoke in a louder voice, telling whoever it was to come off the haystack as he brought the gun up to his waist. He started walking towards the haystack, repeating that whoever that was had to get down off the haystack. He could see movement in the shadows. Whoever it was sliding off backwards, putting the haystack between them and my grandpa. At this point, Grandpa took off in a fast run towards the back of the haystack. He came around the right side of the haystack in time to see who it was. Standing before him was a man-like hairy creature that stood there as he came around the haystack. He could see the dark hair all over its body that sort of glistened in the moonlight. Standing there watching him, he then brought the rifle to his shoulder but stopped, lowering it down to his waist. It was taller than my grandpa. It was about 7 feet tall. Grandpa stood there watching as it slowly turned around, staring back at the gun as it slowly walked off. Grandpa continued watching as it went up the hill towards the road. He followed behind it at about 40 yards. When it got to the top of the hill, it took off in a fast walk towards the road. When this thing got to the top of the hill, it took off in a fast walk towards the road. When Grandpa got to the top of the hill, he could see it already by the road. It was now moving really fast up the pine-covered hills north of the house. When Grandpa couldn't see it anymore, he walked back to the house. My grandma and dad asked what happened, and he just told them it was a drunk guy trying to pass out, but he left. That did help calm my grandma down, and then they went to bed. A few days later, Grandpa told my dad what really happened, and he told him to be careful if he was coming home after dark. I got shivers sent down my spine as my dad was telling me these things. He told me that I needed to be extra careful because the dogs had been barking. As a matter of fact, he said with a serious look, "It's better to just stay inside once it gets dark. The dogs have been barking, and that's not without reason." I knew he was saying to stay inside now, and then asked him about the white owl that he saw that night, and if this must have been the creature that he saw. He sighed, looking into the landscape. "Owls are not just birds, son. They're messengers. That's what the elders always told us too. They bring warnings, messages from the spirit side. It wasn't just crossing my path by any chance. I know it was a sign, maybe a warning about what I encountered later that night. Sometimes they warn us of illness or death. Other times they're just letting us know to be cautious. But that night, with that thing on the haystack, I'm pretty sure the owl knew. It knew that something wasn't right. It's all connected, son, don't you see? These signs, these warnings, we have to pay attention to them. Of course, not out of fear, but out of respect. Things don't just happen for any reason. This morning, while you were still asleep, I went around the house and prayed. I then saw an owl right outside your window. And seeing an owl like that, again, it's not something that we should ignore. My dad then got up and told me to follow him. We went to the side of the house, right outside my bedroom window, and he said, we need to be more careful in the next coming days and weeks. Whatever it's warning us about, it might not be clear yet, but it's better to be safe. Let's keep the lights on tonight, and let's stay inside after dark from now on, for the next few days and weeks, that is. As I stood beside him listening, I noticed how he continued looking towards the landscape behind us. He looked deeply into the distance, almost like he was looking for something. It was clear that he was worried. Nothing happened to us that day, nor for the next few days. However, one of my aunts, who is my dad's sister, ended up in the hospital. I won't go into details about what happened, but she did pass away a few weeks after that. Knowing what I know now, those white owls are messengers. So if you see a white owl on the res, it doesn't mean that something is going to happen to you directly, but for sure it means that something is coming your way that is going to affect you. Stay safe. Check on your family. In many areas of the American West, cutting firewood in the national forest is a necessity if you want a warm house throughout the winter. Our home in central Idaho was no exception. It was normal for my dad to pick me and my brothers up after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. My dad would fell the dead trees, and then saw them into chunks. My brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it. We would continue this assembly line process until we had a truckload of wood. It always happened before nightfall. Hot, sweaty, and exhausted, we would pile into the truck cab and make our way down the mountain. At home the next day, we would unload and split the wood and stack it into neat little bundles. This process was repeated until we had a winter's worth of fuel for the house, our grandma's cabin, and some extra for some neighbors. On this afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. This was well outside our familiar logging area. There was no real reason for the change, but my dad said he wanted to change the scenery. This logging road wasn't maintained in some time. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk out in front, pushing rocks and going out of the way as my dad lurched the truck up the switchbacks. Yard by yard, we slowly made our way up the mountain. As we ascended the mountain and got further into the trees, this strange feeling started to set in. I wasn't sure if I was exhausted from the hike or something more. There was electricity in the air, like the whole mountain was buzzing at a wavelength just below my senses. In some odd way, it felt like the mountain knew we were there, and it wasn't welcoming our presence. I wanted to say something to my brothers, but before I opened my mouth, my younger brother said, "Does anybody else feel like we're not welcome here?" My older brother and I stopped in our tracks and looked back at him. Both of us nodded. This moment was broken by my dad honking and telling us to continue clearing the path. We continued pushing to a small clearing in the woods when we finally stopped the truck. My dad, oblivious to how we're feeling, or simply choosing to ignore it, he grabbed his saw and started working. As the wood was felled and loaded, I couldn't shake that feeling. I noticed my brothers were just taking glances over their shoulders as we worked. Everyone but my dad seemed to be on edge. The sun nestled down into the trees, and twilight began to set in as the light drained from the sky. My anxiety only intensified. It wasn't until my dad told us to load everything up that a wave of relief fluttered over me. I could sense the tension between my brothers start to fade away as well. The truck wasn't even fully loaded. It did throw me off, as we always left with the truck fully loaded. Getting a half load was basically a waste. According to my dad, we would sometimes work in the dark just to make sure the truck was full, but tonight he seemed persistent to head home. With everything loaded, we started down the road. Even though dead tired, everyone seemed to be in a much lighter mood. We were patting and cracking jokes while trying to blow off steam from the afternoon. We were almost out of the tree line and into the valley desert. Whenever you go down the switchbacks, you want to be careful, especially when your truck is loaded, even if it was half, that is. That's when a brown blur jumped up from the downslope side of the switchback. The F-bomb was the only thing that came out of my dad's mouth as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and traveling downhill, there was no way to avoid smashing into whatever this thing was. The truck finally grounded to a standstill. The four of us peered through the windshield. Nobody said a word. Illuminated in the yellow glow of our headlights was the crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling and cursing the deer's existence, my dad got out the truck to investigate. Doing as we were told, my brother stayed put in the truck. I didn't listen, following close behind my dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been traveling fast when we smacked the deer. Just some hair and blood on the grill guard. Hitting a deer wasn't really that unusual. The mountains were full of them. What was strange was that the deer dropped so quickly. At faster speeds, deer can still be upright and sprint away to die in the woods after a collision. You know, that last burst of adrenaline. But this one just fell over like a rag doll. A deep foul smell hit us before even approaching the carcass. Deer do smell bad when they're alive, but this was on a whole other level. It was the smell of decay and rot. My stomach began twisting as we got closer. My nostrils were burning, coming up on the deer. It was dead. Like, really dead. The stench was so overwhelming my eyes were watering. The body was a true horror scene. The deer's eyes were gone, replaced with holes as if to overcompensate for their absence. The tongue was swollen and black as coal. It couldn't be contained and it was hanging out the side of its mouth. The underbelly was split open in the dim headlights. It looked as though the deer's fur was moving, wiggling almost. Holding my breath and covering my mouth, I bent down for a closer look. The deer inside and out was covered in maggots. It was dead alright, but our truck didn't kill it. Clearly it was dead for days, if not for a week or two. That's when that feeling came screaming back again. My dad was always the quiet, stoic type, but right now, even in the dim headlights of the truck, I could see the fear in his face. His gaze wasn't on the deer, but focused down the mountain, poorly masking the fear in his voice. He told me firmly to walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed without objection. As I grabbed the door handle, a loud shriek came from the trees. Branches were shattering and breaking. Something was heading up the slope to us. I slammed my door closed just as my dad reached the truck. Before his door was shut, he had already started to press on the gas. The truck took off, sending us over the deer carcass and racing down the hill with me and my brothers panicking and yelling. At this point it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us. Our truck popped out of the tree line and into the desert sagebrush. Once we made it out the woods, everything got quiet. We were left with only the rumble of the engine and the wind through the half-open windows. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop. We sat in silence. No one was moving to get out. That's when everyone started talking at once. All of us were asking, what was the screaming sound? How does a dead deer jump uphill in front of a truck? There was no way the truck killed it. Dad just shook his head in motion for us to quiet down. And that's when he said, that deer was dead when we hit it. It didn't jump out in front of us. It was thrown at us. We stared at him. That's when he explained that all day up on the mountain, he had a strange feeling, but not wanting to worry us, he kept it to himself. He described the feeling as walking into a stranger's living room while they were sleeping upstairs, and that feeling never left him. As twilight came, he happened to catch a shadow in the corner of his eye. He said he couldn't focus on them long enough for a good look before they dodged behind trees. He said that when he saw this, his stomach dropped. Working hard to keep his composure, he finally told us to get inside the truck so that we could leave. It was after hitting the deer and discovering it was long dead that my dad pieced everything together. Something threw that deer to get us to stop before the shrieking started. He could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the road. It was a trap. Running back to the truck could have started an ambush or triggered something. So we walked back to the truck. The moment that we were inside, he drove the truck downhill with no intention of stopping for anyone. That strange feeling didn't disappear until we hit the county highway. My brothers and I never saw anything as we drove away, but those screams from the forest will never leave my mind. We didn't even gather firewood for the rest of the season. For the first time in his life, my dad ended up buying just what we needed. Even though we started to gather wood again the next season, we never went back up that mountain. The Forest Service has permanently closed and reclaimed that road. The only way back up into those woods is by hiking, one that I'm not interested in. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer carcass, whatever chased us out, it didn't want us there. It wanted us gone, or possibly worse, it wanted us dead.